Hi guys, tonight we ease into a world where every breath feels like it might freeze in the air. You stand in the dim blue of a medieval winter evening, the kind where your fingers sting within seconds, and your nose prickles as if tiny needles hide in the wind. Snow clings to your boots while you trudge along a narrow track between low timber houses. Thin plumes of smoke twist from a few chimneys, but nowhere near enough to promise comfort. The truth is simple. If you lived here, you probably will not survive this without learning every quiet trick villagers use just to stay warm enough to wake again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you are watching from along with your local time. Now dim the lights. The cold presses on your shoulders like a heavy cloak while you step closer to the village centre. You hear muffled voices inside the cramped homes around you. Every sound feels dampened by the thick blanket of snow, as if winter has decided even noise should behave with discipline. A dog barks once sharp and lonely, then fades into silence. You smell wet wood, frozen mud, and the faint tang of smoke drifting from a few guarded hearths. It is not the romantic glow we often imagine. It is thin, strained fire coaxed from precious kindling that families must ration for the entire season. A mainstream historical fact lingers in your mind while you walk. Most medieval peasants spent the winter months inside houses, barely insulated from the elements. Walls made from timber frames filled with wattle and daub were a standard form of construction throughout much of Europe, and although practical, they trapped only a modest amount of heat. You place your hand on one such wall now. It feels like touching a chilled drum. The material is light and porous, and you sense the cold pushing straight through it without hesitation. As your eyes adjust to the fading light, you notice villagers moving about with a steady, almost resigned rhythm. They lift buckets, stack bundles of sticks, shake out damp cloth, and call to one another with a kind of weary determination. People know that if chores slip, even a little winter punishes immediately. You feel tiny flakes settle on your lashes and melt into cold droplets. The sky carries that heavy look that hints at another storm waiting in the wings. A quirky or fringe tidbit drifts into your head and makes you smile despite the chill. Some medieval communities believe that placing a carved wooden figure near the doorway could discourage frost spirits from creeping indoors at night. Whether anyone truly believed it or simply liked the comfort of a small wooden guardian, the charm still sits beside several doors in the village, its face smoothed by years of handling. You reach out and brush your fingers over one. The wood is frigid and strangely soothing. You continue walking as the last daylight slips away. People hurry to finish tasks before darkness fully arrives. A woman pulls a shutter closed with a loud clack. A young boy kicks snow from his shoes, then disappears inside a doorway. Around you, the village seems to fold inward like a great creature settling into a cold slumber. Windows glow faintly with firelight that flickers against the frost gathering on the glass. You notice how the glow stutters, as if even the flames themselves grow tired. Historians still argue whether this hushed evening rhythm came from practical necessity alone, or from long-held ritual patterns influenced by older seasonal traditions. Some scholars think villagers shaped their entire schedule around a sense of spiritual caution once the sun fell below the horizon. Others insist that people simply used every moment of daylight to avoid freezing. You feel both arguments in your bones as the village quiets around you. Practicality and superstition often share a bed in the Middle Ages. Your breath comes out in short silver clouds as you move toward the centre of the settlement. The snow crunches beneath your boots and echoes between the buildings. Roofs sag under thick layers of ice that glitter faintly in the moonlight starting to rise. You catch the faint smell of hay drifting from a barn where animals shuffle restlessly. Their warmth, as meagre as it might be, counts as a precious resource tonight. Many families rely on the animals below their floors or beside their walls to help raise the temperature just enough for a tolerable night. You pause and let the air settle around you. The silence feels ancient and weighty. In a world without constant hums, engines, or electric lights, winter becomes a living presence rather than a simple season. The cold is a character, a force pressing into every corner. You imagine what it feels like to sleep in this world without your modern comforts. Blankets are rough, firewood is scarce. Your best chance is to keep moving, keep gathering, keep breathing warm air over your hands while you wait for the night to relax its grip. You notice how every doorway seems lower than expected, each roof steeper, each boundary tighter. Everything is built to hold what little heat can be kept inside. Even so, you feel a draft glide past your ankles, thin and sharp as a whisper. Someone shuts another door and a gust of wind wells up in its wake. The snow swirls along the ground like tiny silver insects crawling across the earth. You feel them nip at your skin. The village elder shuffles past you carrying a basket of splintered planks. His beard is white as the snow. His face is marked by decades of winters exactly like this one. He does not speak, but he nods toward you with a stoic, almost gentle acknowledgement. You nod back, then follow his slow footsteps with your eyes. Winter has shaped every movement of his body. He knows how to breathe without losing warmth, how to stoop without letting cold seep into his joints, how to walk with efficiency born from necessity. The bellows of distant cattle vibrate faintly through the crisp air. A wooden cart creaks somewhere, the sound elongated and eerie in the frozen dusk. You inhale deeply, tasting the metallic chill. It makes your teeth ache and you feel the sting deep behind your nose. You start to imagine how people relax in this world. How do you fall asleep when the cold waits patiently beside your bed? How do you rest when your breath itself is visible? Proof that the world outside your blanket is just a few degrees above freezing. You look around once more. The tiny hamlet looks peaceful from a distance, almost picturesque. But as you stand within it, you can feel the tension under the beauty. Every door hides families who worry about running out of wood, running out of food, running out of warmth. Every home operates at the edge of survival. And you stand here as if you belong to this landscape, breathing the same harsh air, feeling your bones tighten, sensing your world shrink to the fight between cold and shelter. Now the village settles. A few final shutters close. A dog circles twice before lying on a pile of cold straw. A curtain falls over a window. The moon brightens. You stop walking. You stand in the middle of the frozen road, and winter stares right back at you with a calm, pitiless expression. The night has only begun. Soon you will step inside one of these dim little homes to discover how peasants face the coldest season, without the fireplaces you expect. But for now, you listen, you breathe, you adjust to the dark, and you follow the faint glow pulling you forward. You step toward a low doorway glowing with faint red light, and as you duck inside, the cold outside loosens its grip just a little. Not enough to call it warmth, but enough to make your shoulders relax. Your boots scrape against the packed dirt floor, a surface both uneven and strangely comforting. It feels like stepping onto the skin of the earth itself, firm yet forgiving. These floors are not meant for beauty. They are meant for survival, shaped by countless feet, swept with bundled twigs and tamped down over and over until they form something close to a hardened surface. Your eyes adjust slowly. The interior of the house is small, almost cave-like, with walls made of woven sticks plastered with daub. When you touch one, the texture is rough and gritty. Bits of straw poke from the dried clay like tiny bones. This type of construction is a mainstream historical fact. Wattle and daub walls were used by millions of medieval peasants because the materials were cheap, local, and easy to repair. They offered modest insulation, though not nearly enough to stop winter from sliding inside whenever it pleased. You hear the faint rattling of the wind outside, but here inside this dim space the sound becomes a distant muffled hum. The air smells of damp earth, wool, and faint smoke clinging to clothing rather than burning freely. You squint at the hearth in the centre. It is barely more than a shallow pit with a few dull embers buried under ash, hardly a fire at all, yet the family guarding it treats it as precious treasure. Firewood is too valuable to burn through the night. Many households ration their fuel so severely that they allow the evening flames to shrink to glowing dots by bedtime. You stand near the embers and feel only the faintest kiss of warmth. A quirky or fringe tidbit drifts from memory as you crouch beside the hearth. Some villagers believe that if you sprinkled a pinch of dried herbs into the ash before bedtime, a protective spirit would discourage drafts from slipping across the room. Whether anyone truly believed it or simply liked the routine, you see a small clay pot of herbs resting beside the fire pit. Someone clearly used it not long ago. You rise and look around. The room is one single space. No bedrooms, no partitions, just one chamber where the entire family cooks, eats, works, and sleeps. The air vibrates with the soft crackling pop of cooling timber beams. The ceiling is low enough that you feel as though you could reach up and steady the rafters with your fingertips. Every inch of the structure is designed to trap heat. Thick thatch above, mud and straw walls around. But even with all that effort, the cold remains an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. You inhale. The air tastes slightly metallic from the dying embers and faintly sweet from dried hay stored in bundles near the walls. You run your foot over the dirt floor again and realise something unexpected. Underneath your heel, the ground holds a lingering warmth. Before long, you notice the reason. The family has tucked flat stones beneath the dirt near the hearth. These stones heat slowly during the day and cool slowly during the night. Historians still argue whether this practice was intentional engineering or simply a natural result of cooking fires heating the ground. Some believe peasants deliberately placed stones to trap thermal energy. Others suspect it occurred organically over time without anyone planning it. Whatever the truth, you feel that faint warmth right now, barely enough to be noticed but far better than frozen soil. You move deeper into the room. The narrow windows are shuttered tight. Even a small gap would let in a brutal draft. The shutters are thick planks with bits of cloth wedged into the edges. You gently press your palm against one and feel a cold pulse from outside, as if the night is tapping its fingers against the wood. The villagers fight back with patches of wool stuffed into cracks, ropes of dried moss pushed along seams, even mud smoothed onto panels in late autumn to seal spaces before the first frost arrived. You kneel to inspect a corner where a tiny line of frost creeps along the wall. The cold finds its way in no matter what. But the clever thing is how these people minimise it. Low ceilings help keep warm air from drifting upward and escaping. Raised sleeping platforms near the centre of the room take advantage of the warmest pocket of air. The family spreads thick straw over the floor to add another layer between themselves and the cold earth. It is not luxury. It is urgency shaped into architecture. You sit on a low wooden stool worn smooth by years of use. Your fingertips trace shallow grooves in the wood where someone once carved marks or letters. They feel old, softened, and strangely intimate. You sense the quiet persistence of generations each winter, the same story repeated. Families layering blankets, patching walls, conserving embers, adjusting routines. Season after season, this house has stood here protecting its people as best it can. Breath fogs slightly in front of your face, even inside. The temperature might be just above freezing, and yet the difference between here and outside feels enormous. You draw your cloak tighter. Your shoulders sink with a mix of exhaustion and relief. Shelter does not mean warmth. Shelter means the cold will kill you more slowly, giving you time to sleep if you are lucky. A woman across the room stirs a pot of thin broth, tapping the wooden spoon against the rim in a steady rhythm. She does not speak, but she glances toward you with soft, tired eyes. Her children nestle near her feet under a shared wool blanket. You feel the tug of that simple comfort, the pull of a warm body against yours, the reassurance of being enclosed in a space where people breathe together. Near the roof, you notice bundles of drying plants hanging like strange upside-down bouquets. Some are onions, some herbs, some simply weeds gathered to fill gaps under blankets. Everything has a purpose in winter. Nothing is wasted. Every item in this house seems to whisper the same message. Survive tonight, and then survive the next and the next and the next until spring finally remembers you. You step toward the center again, letting your fingers brush the rough wall. The texture grounds you. You feel the cold, the grit, the life shaped within these materials. The house may not be warm, but it holds something else. Persistence, quiet defiance, a kind of bravery you can feel under your fingertips. The embers crackle once more as if exhaling. A child shifts under a blanket. A shutter creaks in the wind. And you realize that this small circle of space is where the story of winter survival truly begins. You settle deeper into the dim room, letting the muted glow from the embers guide your steps. The air carries a quiet heaviness, the kind that makes every movement feel slower and softer. You watch the family preparing their sleeping area, and soon you understand a truth that does not need to be spoken. Warmth here is not an individual achievement. It is a group project. You shift closer to the center of the room, and the realization settles over you like a woolen cloak. If you want to stay alive through a medieval winter night, you press your body close to others because the cold does not negotiate. You notice the family's bedding arranged in a huddle. Straw pallets cover the raised platform and blankets lie piled on top in irregular layers. The mother gestures for her children to come closer, and they willingly slide against each other with practiced ease. You begin to understand how much shared heat matters. Human bodies packed close can warm a small space in ways that any weak fire could never match. As you sit nearby, an old piece of knowledge surfaces. Many rural communities relied heavily on group sleeping because houses leaked heat almost as quickly as they gained it. This was not a romantic custom. It was a pragmatic answer to a relentless climate. You imagine lying between your relatives half asleep, hearing their breathing, feeling their weight shift slightly under blankets. It is not privacy. It is survival. You adjust your position and feel your shoulder brush the edge of a rough wool cover. The fabric is scratchy, smelling faintly of lanolin and smoke. The family's dog circles twice and curls against the feet of the youngest child. The heat of even a small animal becomes precious when the night air sinks toward ice. You watch the child smile, drowsily comforted by the familiar warmth. A curious bit of folklore flickers through your memory, something whispered by older villagers in distant regions. Some families believed that if you kept a warm stone wrapped in cloth at the centre of the bed, it invited gentle spirits to linger and guard the sleepers through the night. Whether anyone believed the story literally or simply liked the idea of companionship in the dark, you see several stones warming under the hearth ash even now. Someone will tuck them into the bedding before the final embers fade. You gaze at the walls again. Thin cracks glimmer with faint frost. The cold seeps through silently. You pull your cloak tighter, mirroring the villagers' instinctive movements. They do not waste words telling each other to bundle up. Everyone already knows. Winter teaches without kindness. As you settle closer to the sleeping platform, you notice how the father positions himself at the side nearest the wall. His body will block the worst of the drafts and shield the others. Those who can endure the cold better take the edge positions. Those more vulnerable nestle inward. It is an unspoken arrangement refined through generations. A line of thought crosses your mind as you watch them settle. Some researchers debate how deliberate these sleeping formations really were. Did families follow a conscious pattern, or did these habits form naturally over time until no one thought about them anymore? The old manuscripts give only hints, and no two historians interpret them quite the same way. You quietly lean into the possibility that it was both instinctive and practical. Humans often create order without planning it. Your skin tingles lightly as a new gust of night wind brushes the outer wall. You hear it whistle softly against the shutters. The villagers hardly react. They are already cocooned in their nightly arrangement. The children fall asleep first, their breathing slow and rhythmic. The mother hums a quiet melody while smoothing the blanket over them. Her voice blends with the creaks of the house and the faint sounds of animals shifting below the floor. You watch the father tuck straw into a gap near the bedding, adjusting it with quick practiced gestures. Straw may scratch the skin, but it traps warmth surprisingly well. Its texture, dry and rustling, adds a faint sound to the room that feels almost comforting. You trail your fingers through a loose bundle, feeling how the stiff fibres shift and settle like tiny wooden threads. Then your gaze drifts to the ceiling. Blackened beams stretch overhead, coated with years of smoke. The surface looks polished in some places, glossy from the oils of countless fires. In the dim light, the beams seem to sag slightly inward, as if leaning protectively over the sleeping family. They creak with every shift of the wind, a natural lullaby built into the bones of the house. You begin to feel the weight of the room. It is not exhaustion. It is the deep grounding heaviness that comes from being surrounded by warmth that is earned rather than gifted. You feel your own breath grow slower as you sit beside the embers. Their glow pulses gently like the heartbeat of the house. You lean in slightly, letting your shoulder rest against a post warm from earlier cooking fires. The wood radiates a faint heat that feels almost tender. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the countless winter nights families have endured in this very spot. Nights filled with fear, resilience, tiny joys, shared jokes whispered under blankets, and the steady knowledge that another long day of winter waits beyond dawn. Inside this single room, winter feels both smaller and larger. Smaller because humans face it together. Larger because it presses against the walls with such immense patience. You picture the snow outside piling higher, the wind sweeping across empty fields, the night sky thick with silent stars. And yet here, just a few feet from that cold world, a cluster of bodies keeps a spark of warmth alive. You sense movement beside you. The father shifts, settling into his place. The dog snores softly. The embers dim a little more. Night deepens, and the lesson becomes unmistakable. You cannot fight winter alone. You lean into another person, you breathe the same air, you share the same blanket. You become a small glowing knot of warmth that pushes back the night just enough. You look around once more, letting your eyes linger on each small detail. The wrapped stones, the straw-packed walls, the layered blankets, the soft breathing. All of it fits together like pieces of a quiet puzzle, and with each breath you become part of it too. This is how peasants survive their coldest nights. Close. Connected. Breathing warmth into the space between bodies, letting the collective heat turn a frozen world into a place where sleep can still settle over tired limbs. And as you sit there, you feel your own muscles loosen your own breath, slow your own body answering the invitation of the night. You shift your weight and let your gaze wander toward the sleeping platform. The family has nearly finished arranging their resting space, and you step closer curious to feel the textures of their nightly world. The bedding looks simple from a distance, but once you lean down and brush your fingertips across it, you understand that these materials carry entire stories in their fibres. The first layer is a thick bed of straw spread across a wooden frame. When you press your palm into it, the surface rustles with a dry whisper. The straw bends and rebounds, prickly but supportive. It is surprisingly effective at keeping bodies lifted off the cold earth below. People in many regions relied on this type of pallet because softer bedding was far too costly. That detail appears again and again in old household records, showing how common such straw mattresses were for ordinary families. But the straw alone would be rough on bare skin. So you notice a coarse linen sheet stretched over the pallet, worn enough that the weave feels uneven beneath your fingers. The cloth smells faintly of smoke and crushed herbs, likely used to keep pests away. You lift the edge slightly and bits of straw cling to the underside. It is not clean by modern standards, yet it feels lived in, shaped by countless nights of shifting bodies and whispered dreams. A small fact drifts through your thoughts while you study the bedding. Many households refresh their straw only a few times each year. By midwinter, the pallet often carried the scent of the season, along with bits of debris from the fields. The idea of neat, crisp bedding is centuries away from this moment. Here practicality matters more than comfort, and the villagers accept a little itchiness in exchange for insulation. You straighten up and examine the blankets piled on top. There are several layers, each different. One is rough wool, thick enough to block wind if needed. Another is patched together from scraps of old tunics, a mosaic of faded colours sewn by hands that probably worked by candlelight. A softer layer lies beneath, likely stuffed with whatever materials could be gathered. You sniff lightly and catch a subtle hint of dried plants inside the padding. Some households tucked crushed leaves or lavender-like herbs inside bedding to discourage insects, though whether it worked well or simply made people feel better is hard to prove. You suspect the latter, but you admire the ingenuity all the same. As you trace the edge of the patched blanket, you recall that some medieval regions used mattress covers filled with feathers or wool when available. Yet such luxury rarely reached peasant homes. A few scattered accounts mention families saving feathers for years to make a single padded cover. You imagine the pride someone might have felt after collecting enough for even a small cushion. You look at the family again. They settle onto the pallets without complaint. Their bodies sink into the uneven surface, adjusting comfortably, because this is what they have always known. You sit beside them for a moment, leaning your weight cautiously into the straw. It shifts with a soft crunch under you. Your hip finds a ridge, then a dip, and finally a spot that fits just right. Imperfect bedding can still cradle you if you allow yourself to stop comparing it to the softness of your own world. You run your fingers across one of the wool blankets again. The texture is coarse enough to tug at your skin, yet there is warmth woven into every fibre. Wool retains heat even when slightly damp, which made it essential for winter nights. People valued these blankets almost as much as clothing. You can feel why. You pull a small corner over your hand, and heat gathers beneath it almost instantly. Your mind drifts to an unusual detail you once heard from an old folk tale. Some villagers believed that if you placed a small carved spindle under your pillow, it would keep nightmares from creeping into your dreams. Whether that was superstition, or simply a comforting habit, you notice a tiny spindle tucked beside the bedding. Its presence makes you smile. Even in the harshest conditions, people leave room for a bit of magic. You shift again, and let your hand glide along the wooden frame of the bed. The edges are smooth in some places and jagged in others, shaped not by beauty but by necessity. A few nails hold the structure together. In one corner a rope supports the frame, stretched tight and creaking softly. Beds were not always neatly built. Many were assembled from scraps of leftover timber repaired repeatedly, and finally abandoned only when they collapsed entirely. A question floats into your mind, one that scholars often debate in various manuscripts. Were these bedding arrangements standard across all peasant homes, or did they vary widely depending on region and resources? Some researchers suggest that straw pallets were nearly universal, while others argue that certain communities used rushes, moss, or even dried seaweed when straw was scarce. The evidence is scattered and incomplete, leaving room for interpretation. You find comfort in the uncertainty. History often breathes in the gaps between facts. You lie back, slightly propping yourself on your elbows as you imagine what it feels like to sleep here every night. You picture the faint rustling under you when you shift. You picture the warmth building slowly between layers of wool. You picture waking in the morning with bits of straw in your hair or imprints left by the uneven mattress. The texture of this existence becomes clearer with each breath. A child beside you wiggles deeper under the blanket, letting out a small sigh of contentment. The sound softens the room. The embers glow faintly. A gentle draft brushes your cheek, and you realize that comfort in this world does not come from softness or luxury. It comes from familiarity, from the weight of blankets shared with loved ones, from knowing you can face another cold night, because the bedding beneath you has held you through countless nights already. You press your palm into the straw once more, feeling its firmness. You inhale the earthy scent. You listen to the quiet rustle as you shift, and slowly the harshness of this bed begins to fade. In its place grows a kind of humble peace, a reminder that even the simplest materials can cradle a weary body when the world outside freezes solid. You sit upright again, letting the faint warmth settle into your shoulders, while your eyes drift toward the edges of the room. No matter how carefully the villagers prepare their home, you can still feel the cold creeping in from every direction. It slips along the floor like a patient animal, squeezing through places you would not expect. You shift your leg slightly, and a tiny shiver climbs your spine as a thread of icy air brushes your ankle. You take a slow breath and study the walls more closely. The timber beams groan softly as the night wind pushes against the house. Between those beams lie panels of daub that have been patched so many times you can no longer tell where the original surface ends and later repairs begin. The layers look like overlapping scars, each one marking a battle fought against winter. You reach out and touch one seam. Even through the dried mud, you feel a subtle chill seeping inward. A widely recognised detail from village life comes to mind while you examine the walls. Many rural homes had gaps between boards or around doors that villagers attempted to fill with anything they could find. Wool scraps, moss pressed into cords, clay packed into crevices, even spare bits of cloth. It was a constant struggle because surfaces cracked easily in the cold. Tonight you can see several fresh patches where the residents tried their best to block drafts, only hours before sunset. A gust rattles the shutters, making one of them bounce slightly against the frame. The sound is sharp, like knuckles tapping wood. You tilt your head and notice a faint sliver of moonlight cutting through a barely visible split. It is thin as a hair, but cold enough to send another small wave of air toward the floor. You crouch beside the window and feel the stream brushing your fingertips. Something amusing drifts into your memory, a small piece of winter wisdom whispered in some farming households long ago. People sometimes tucked clumps of chewed bread paste into cracks as an emergency seal. It hardened quickly and could be replaced daily. Not exactly elegant, but clever in its own messy way. As strange as it sounds, you would probably use it too if the cold kept slipping in while your children tried to sleep. You rise again and look upward. The ceiling beams carry dark streaks from years of smoke, but where the soot is uneven, you catch glimpses of frost forming near the edges. It looks like thin white lace creeping in from the outside world. If you place your hand near the roofline, you feel how the cold presses downward like a slow, silent tide. You imagine lying beneath these beams each night, listening to them contract and expand with every shift of temperature. A question forms in your mind, one that researchers continue to discuss when studying domestic architecture from this era. Did villagers intentionally design their homes with narrow doorways and low ceilings to combat drafts, or were those choices simply byproducts of limited resources and simple construction? The surviving buildings hint at both possibilities, leaving room for interpretation. You stand in the middle of the room and sense how these cramped proportions might actually help trap warmth, even if the builders never articulated the idea. Your attention drifts toward the door. Its planks are held together with wooden pegs, and the surface bears scratches from many winters of opening and closing with stiff fingers. A bit of cloth has been stuffed beneath it, attempting to block the space where the threshold meets the floor. When you slide your foot toward that spot, the air grows noticeably colder, almost as if the night is exhaling directly through the seam. You watch the cloth tremble slightly each time the wind howls outside. You step away and feel the more comfortable pocket of warmth near the hearth. The contrast is immediate. Even a few feet can mean the difference between tolerable chill and bone-deep cold. No wonder families clustered tightly around the fire earlier in the evening. Every draft feels like an invisible hand pressing against your skin, reminding you that the house cannot seal itself perfectly, no matter how carefully people prepare. A sleeping child shifts under the blankets, drawing the wool tighter around their shoulders. You notice the breeze ruffling a stray bit of straw near their feet. The draft follows the floor, curling around the room like a curious spirit. It does not move violently. Instead, it glides gently cold enough to make you blink and adjust your posture each time it brushes past. You tuck your legs closer to your body instinctively. You walk to the far side of the room where the floor meets the outer wall. Here the cold feels sharper. You squat down, breathe gently, and watch your breath drift sideways as if pushed by an unseen stream. You imagine how villagers grew skilled at noticing these tiny movements. They learned to predict where drafts would slip, which parts of the house cooled fastest, and how to arrange bedding so that children stayed in the warmest spots. Your thoughts wander to the tools lying nearby. A small basket of rags, a wooden mallet, bundles of collected moss. Everything arranged for quick repairs. Drafts were not just annoyances. They could be dangerous, especially during long nights when temperatures plunged without warning. People patched and repatched constantly, never assuming the house would hold on its own. The wind outside rises for a moment, moaning through the cracks like a lonely instrument. You feel it vibrate through the beams and travel into the core of the room. The family barely stirs. They know these sounds well. They have heard worse. Their calmness does not mean the cold is harmless, only that fear wastes energy they need to conserve. You take one more slow circle around the room, letting your hands skim the walls, the windows, the doorframe. Everywhere you touch holds a story of struggle against the season. You imagine generations of hands, smoothing clay into gaps, pressing cloth into seams, adjusting shutters, battling the stubborn cold with whatever scraps they had on hand. And as you step back toward the centre of the room, you realise something important. A medieval night is not defined only by the biting air or the soft glow of embers. It is shaped by the constant conversation between humans and the drafts that test their skill. Every gap filled, every cloth stuffed, every patch added is another quiet triumph in a world determined to steal warmth. You sit down once more near the straw pallets. The cold prowls along the floor, curious but held at bay. Above you the beams settle with a soft groan. The drafts whisper at the edges of the room, searching for an open path, and you settle deeper into the moment, understanding how much effort it takes simply to sleep when winter presses its weight against the walls. You sit quietly for a moment, listening to the faint creaks of the house, until another sound rises gently beneath your feet. A soft shifting, a warm snort, the rustle of hay. It takes you a second to recognise it, but once you do, the reality settles in with steady clarity. The warmth in this home does not come only from people. It comes from the animals living directly below you. You move toward a trapdoor at the far end of the room. It is little more than two planks held together with pegs worn smooth by time and touch. When you lift it slightly, a pocket of warm, earthy air rises to meet you. The temperature shift is immediate. You inhale the scent of hay, animal musk, and damp wood, a blend strangely comforting after so much cold dryness. Many rural households built their living quarters above a barn-like space, letting the heat from animals drift upward. This arrangement was not rare at all. It was a practical design chosen by people who understood that every bit of body heat mattered. Cows, goats, and even pigs gave off warmth far more reliable than a weak hearth fire. You imagine the family upstairs quietly thanking the creatures below without ever saying the words out loud. You lean over the opening and peer into the dimness. Moonlight sneaks through slats in the outer wall, catching strands of hay that glow faintly like golden threads. You hear a cow shifting her weight, her heavy body settling deeper into straw. A goat chews, rhythmically unbothered by the lateness of the hour. Their movements send tiny vibrations up into the floorboards, making the whole room feel alive. A trace of old belief surfaces in your thoughts as you watch. Some villagers once said that sleeping above animals invited good fortune because the creatures guarded the household during winter nights. Whether anyone saw it literally or simply felt comfort in the presence of sturdy bodies beneath them, the idea lingers in stories passed down through generations. You smile a little, understanding how such a belief might have grown naturally from the relief of borrowed warmth. You ease the trapdoor closed and walk to the centre of the room again. The floor now feels warmer, especially near the middle where the boards are thinnest. You kneel and place your palm flat on the wood. Heat radiates upward, gentle but steady. It is a surprisingly effective layer of insulation, a living furnace shaped by instinct rather than engineering. A question that scholars sometimes raise floats into your thoughts. Did medieval families intentionally design these split-level homes from the beginning, or did the practice evolve gradually as people noticed the temperature difference? Surviving records do not always agree. Some fragments describe planned layouts, while others suggest more improvised arrangements. The truth likely lies somewhere between shaped by necessity, climate, and regional customs. You sit back and listen again. The rhythmic breathing of animals blends with the softer sounds of the sleeping family. The two worlds rely on each other. Animals depend on people for food and shelter. People depend on animals for warmth and survival. The boundary between barn and home has faded almost entirely in this shared winter space. You picture the daily routine. In the morning the father climbs down, first checks each animal spreads fresh hay, and clears any mess before it becomes overwhelming. The heat rises steadily as the animals begin to move around, warming the house from below like a hidden hearth. By late afternoon the space has absorbed enough warmth to push upward through the planks, keeping the room above survivable, even when storms rage outside. It is a cycle older than memory. Curiosity leads you to press your ear lightly against the floor. You hear the slow chew of a cud, the shift of a hoof scraping against hay, the unmistakable sigh of a resting creature settling in. These sounds become a nighttime lullaby for the family above. You imagine a child waking in the quiet dark, fear momentarily rising in their chest, only to hear a familiar grunt below that reassures them. They are not alone. Their home breathes with them. You stand again and glance around the room. The slight warmth drifting upward changes the entire feel of the space. The cold still waits along the walls and around the windows, but the centre of the room contains a softness, a buffer against the frozen world outside. The flooring creaks gently under your weight, responding like a living shell stretched between two realms. Your fingers trace a crack between the floorboards. Even through this tiny gap, a stronger hint of warmth escapes, rising like a thin exhale. You imagine how welcome that warmth feels on a night when the wind outside scrapes the walls with icy insistence. You picture the family lying above, packed together on their bedding, breathing slowly, the animal heat rising beneath them like an invisible blanket. You take another step and the air shifts subtly. The heat is not hot enough to make you comfortable, not by modern standards, but it creates a protective layer. It keeps the worst of winter at a distance. Without these animals beneath the floor, the home would likely drop to freezing inside every night. Instead, the family has created a relationship with their livestock that goes far beyond food and labour. You pause to appreciate how ingenious this system truly is. No machinery, no fuel source except hay and breathing. Yet it works beautifully, shaped through centuries of observation and survival. You imagine the first person who realised how much difference a warm body made on a cold night, and how that simple understanding spread quietly from village to village. As the night deepens, the animal sounds grow slower and softer. Their warmth spreads upward, settling into the planks and walls. The family above sleeps peacefully, protected by creatures whose day will begin early with milking, feeding, and work. You feel the rhythm of the house as one living organism sustained by humans and animals intertwined. You take one last slow breath and let the warm air beneath your feet rise around you. The cold still prowls outside waiting. But inside this small home, the combined warmth of bodies, both human and animal, creates a sanctuary strong enough to carry everyone through the long winter night. You pull your cloak a little tighter as you shift your focus toward the family's clothing. The blankets help, the animal heat helps even more, but you quickly realize that what people wear through the night is just as important as anything else. In a world where fires die early and drafts slip in like thin knives, clothing becomes armor against the cold even while you sleep. You kneel beside a pile of garments folded near the bedding. The fabric looks heavy, almost stiff, but when you touch it, your fingers sink into a dense, woolly texture. The surface feels slightly oily from lanolin, that natural wax embedded in sheep's wool. It gives the cloth a faint, earthy smell and a protective quality that repels moisture. No wonder families rarely removed these layers during the coldest months. You imagine lying down at night, still wrapped in the very garments you worked in all day. You lift one shirt and hold it to the faint light. The fibres are uneven, some thicker than others, evidence of hand spinning that was done without any expectation of perfect uniformity. Yet that unevenness traps warmth beautifully. Across Europe, villagers relied on wool as their primary winter fabric, and surviving records from old inventories frequently mention heavy tunics, cloaks, and underlayers made from it. You feel the truth of that in your hands now. Next to the tunic lies a pair of hose patched in several places. The patches are mismatched in colour, stitched on with a confidence that values practicality far more than neatness. You run your fingers along one seam and feel the slight ridge where the fabric overlaps. You imagine someone sitting near the fire earlier in the season mending this piece for the 10th time, determined to make it last through one more winter. Your mind drifts to a small piece of folk practice whispered in rural communities long ago. Some people believed that wearing a scrap of unwashed wool around the chest at night protected the heart from cold spirits that wandered through midwinter air. Whether anyone took the idea seriously is unclear, but you do see a few little wool wraps lying near the bedding, just the right size to tuck under a shirt. You shift your gaze to the corner where the father left his outer cloak. The garment is heavy, thick, and far longer than anything you would comfortably sleep in. Yet many villagers slipped into bed wearing their cloaks, letting their own body heat build beneath the layered folds. You run your hand along the hem and feel tiny burrs clinging to the fibres. This cloak has travelled through fields, forests, and snow-gathering pieces of the landscape as it went. As you examine the clothing more closely, a question takes shape, one that researchers often debate when studying medieval textiles. Were these layers standardised from household to household, or did clothing styles vary significantly based on region, climate, and available resources? Some scholars believe cold weather forced patterns of dress to converge, while others point to archaeological finds showing surprising regional variety. The evidence does not settle neatly into one picture, leaving room for interpretation as you stand among these worn garments. You gently pick up a child's tunic that looks softer than the others. It is lined with brushed wool, which feels almost plush compared to the coarse outer layers. Children always received any extra softness the household could spare. You imagine a mother smoothing this tunic over her sleeping child, hoping the warmth will hold through the night. Nearby a basket holds mittens made from felted wool. The felt feels thick and solid in your grip, a dense fabric that blocks wind almost entirely. Felted items were treasured during midwinter because they trapped heat more effectively than woven cloth. You picture the family pulling these mittens over their hands even while sleeping, especially during the harshest nights when frost formed on the inside of windows. You turn toward the sleeping family again. Even now you can see that each person lies under the blanket, still fully dressed. Shirts tucked into hose sleeves, pulled low cloaks draped loosely on top. Removing clothing during winter nights would be foolish. The temperature can drop sharply without warning, and a few minutes of exposed skin could mean hours of aching cold. You lean down and feel the fabric closest to you. The wool has softened from years of use shaped by the heat and sweat of countless nights. It holds the faint scent of smoke, sweat, and fields. This is the smell of survival woven into every thread. The mother turns slightly in her sleep, her cloak shifting enough for you to glimpse a thick cord belt tied around her waist. Such belts were often kept on even at night, partly to secure layers and partly to carry small pouches or tools that mattered too much to leave scattered. You imagine how comforting it might feel to sleep with everything essential still on your body. A small draught passes over your cheek, reminding you just how thin the barrier between warmth and winter truly is. Clothing becomes a wall, a barrier you build across your own skin. Without these layers, the cold would swallow you whole. You reach for another garment in the pile, a pair of thick socks made from coarse wool. The stitching looks almost hurried, the threads uneven, but the socks feel incredibly dense. You picture someone wearing these while burrowing into a straw bed, the warmth slowly seeping into their toes while frost forms silently on the far wall. You sit back holding the socks in your hands for a moment. The fabric warms slightly from your touch, responding almost instantly. You understand then why villagers trusted these garments so deeply. Wool feels alive in the winter, shifting, breathing, trapping heat. You look around once more, letting the room's quiet settle over you. The blankets, the layers, the cloaks, the mittens, the patched hose, the tunics softened from years of use. Each piece is a tool. Each one matters. And as the cold presses against the walls outside, you recognise something simple and profound. Clothing here is not fashion. Clothing is shelter. You rest your hand on the edge of the straw pallet and let your attention drift beyond the warmth gathered in this little cluster of bodies. The room itself has begun its own nightly transformation. As the embers dim and the last hints of daylight vanish, the world inside the cottage fills with a different kind of sound. Not loud, not frightening. Instead, a soft symphony that feels strangely intimate once you settle into it. The first thing you notice is the wooden frame around you. Every beam carries a slow rhythmic creaking, the natural voice of timber, shrinking slightly as the cold deepens outside. It sounds almost like whispering breaths, tiny groans that rise and fall in no particular pattern. You tilt your head and listen more carefully. Each board has its own tone, its own way of answering the night. In homes across medieval Europe, this nightly chorus of wood on wood was something everyone knew well, often mentioned in old descriptions of rural houses built from green timber that continued to shift long after construction. Your eyes drift toward the shuttered window. A faint whistle escapes through a hidden gap, no louder than a sigh. The sound quivers and then fades as the wind outside changes its mood. You imagine lying in bed, half asleep, hearing that thin song threading through the room like a silver thread. It is not unpleasant, only present a reminder that winter always wants to join the household, whether invited or not. Somewhere above the rafters you hear the flutter of a small creature. Perhaps a nesting bird shifting in its sleep, or a mouse exploring the roof thatch. Rural homes often shared their nights with tiny neighbours, and people simply accepted those faint scurrying sounds as part of the landscape. A few surviving folk tales even claim that mice moving across the beams foretold a lucky day ahead, though no one agrees how that idea began. You smile slightly as another faint scratch echoes overhead light enough that it barely stirs the air. The family breathes softly behind you, adding their own rhythm to the night. One child snores gently through a stuffy nose. The father exhales in a deep, slow pattern, the kind that comes only after long work in freezing weather. Their breaths mingle with the soft rustling of blankets and the shifting of straw beneath them. If you close your eyes, you can almost imagine the entire house breathing with them, rising and falling in drowsy agreement. You pause as a new sound reaches your ears. The faint clink of a metal pot cooling near the hearth. The pot contracts as the temperature drops, releasing tiny delicate taps like raindrops on stone. You move closer to the hearth and sit cross-legged watching the soft red glow under the ash. Even the embers speak crackling faintly as bits of wood surrender the last of their warmth. These sounds echo across centuries mentioned in old winter journals, describing nights filled with gentle crackles and the soft settling of ash. You tilt your head again when the wind outside rises sharply, rattling the shutters with a sudden burst of energy. The noise fills the room like a quick gust of breath, but then fades back to a dull murmur. Scholars sometimes discuss how much these nightly wind sounds shaped medieval sleep patterns, especially during storms. Some argue that people grew accustomed to the constant presence of wind and slept through it easily, while others believe the noise kept families half awake, always aware of the weather's mood. As you listen now, you can imagine both possibilities. A quiet moment follows so still you can hear your own heartbeat. Then unexpectedly the floor trembles with a soft thump from the animals below. A cow settling deeper into straw, a goat adjusting its position. Their presence sends gentle vibrations through the planks, almost like the pulse of a giant creature slumbering beneath the house. The sound is neither loud nor startling. It is grounding, steady, and strangely comforting. You imagine villagers lying awake smiling faintly when they heard that familiar thump, knowing warmth still rose from below. Your attention shifts to the roof again. The thatched bundles create a soft muffled texture that absorbs sound, enhancing the quiet of the space. Occasionally a tiny bit of ice slides down the outer surface and lands with a faint patter. You barely notice it until the second or third time, each small sound blending into the wider hush of the night. You breathe slowly, matching your rhythm to the stillness around you. Then another subtle noise curls into the room, a faint, steady drip. Meltwater from earlier snowfall slipping down one beam, finding a tiny flaw in the thatch, and tapping onto a clay pot placed beneath it. The sound is delicate, like fingertips tapping cloth. Many families kept pots near potential leak spots, knowing winter often tested even the best repairs. You touch the pot rim and feel a thin line of cold moisture just beginning to form. As you stay still, the combined sounds create a gentle tapestry. Wood stretching and relaxing, wind weaving through cracks, straw shifting as sleepers move, pot metal clicking softly, animals grunting below. This is the soundtrack of a medieval night, a world without engines or humming appliances where every sound comes from living bodies, natural materials, or the slow settling of a house that has weathered countless winters. You breathe deeply again, letting these sounds wash over you. Instead of overwhelming noise, you find layers of calm. The room feels alive, each sound a reminder that life continues, even when the world outside freezes silent. You picture lying here until sleep pulls you under, passing through the darkness with the soft chorus guiding your thoughts. In this dim cottage, the night is never truly silent. It is gentle, patient, filled with a quiet hum of survival. And as you listen, you begin to feel your own eyelids grow heavier, lulled by the simple music of beams, windstraw breath, and warm bodies keeping each other safe through the longest hours of winter. You shift your weight and glance once more at the fading embers, then at the tightly shuttered window. A thought flickers through your mind with sharp clarity. This quiet little cottage is lucky to have even a handful of glowing coals left. Many homes in the poorest regions spent winter nights with no fire at all. You feel the truth of that settle into your bones as you imagine the world beyond this room, where darkness presses against families who cannot afford even a few scraps of wood to keep the cold at bay. You make your way toward the hearth and crouch beside it. The ashes glow faintly, barely warm. You push your hand close enough to feel the heat, though even calling it heat feels generous. It is more like a memory of warmth rather than the thing itself. The family here stretches their fuel carefully, letting the fire burn bright only during cooking hours and early evening chores. Once night falls, the flame fades because there is simply not enough wood to spare. You picture another cottage down the road owned by a family who could not gather enough firewood before the first snow. Perhaps the forest belongs to a landlord who restricts access. Perhaps the rulers of a region forbid peasants from cutting trees in certain woods, keeping resources for their own estates. Documentation from various feudal territories shows how often access to firewood was rationed, taxed, or tightly controlled. You imagine living in such a place where stepping into the forest with an axe could lead to fines or worse. A detail surfaces as you let your fingers sift through the ash. People found creative ways to maintain a sense of heat when they lacked wood. Some homes used dried peat or bundled sticks collected illegally at night. Others burned brushwood so thin and brittle it produced more smoke than flame. And many simply let the fire die early, choosing to save even a tiny bit of fuel for the next morning's cooking. You imagine waking to a cold so sharp it cuts the breath out of your chest, knowing the only way to warm the house again is to coax a spark from the meagre embers saved under ash. Near the hearth sits a small clay container with a lid shaped like a squat little dome. When you lift it, you see faint traces of charred coals tucked inside. This is a small survival tool used in some regions to preserve embers overnight. A few glowing coals could be kept alive for hours when smothered under ash. In the morning, the family would blow gently on the embers, feeding them with dry twigs, until a weak flame stirred back to life. Without this method, lighting a new fire from scratch could take valuable time and resources. Your attention drifts to the far corner of the room where the shadows pool thick and deep. You imagine a night without even this slight warmth. The air would bite into your fingertips and cling to your lungs, making each breath feel as if it carried tiny shards of ice. You try to picture lying on the straw pallet in absolute darkness, while the cold settles into every joint. You would hear the same wooden creaks, the same animal sounds below the same sigh of the winter wind. But without a single ember warming the air, those sounds would feel sharper, more intrusive, as if the night itself were testing your endurance. A thought comes to you that scholars sometimes debate when examining life in rural settlements. How often did families choose to let the fire die entirely, not out of superstition or routine, but out of sheer necessity? Some historians believe that in the harshest areas it was common for households to pass many nights without any fire at all, once winter reached its deepest point. Others argue that families always saved some ember, no matter how faint, because the psychological comfort of even a tiny spark mattered as much as the heat. After standing in this room, you find yourself leaning toward the second idea. Even the smallest glow seems to change the atmosphere in a way that nothing else can. You wander toward the door and touch its rough surface. Without a fire burning, the wood would be as cold as stone. You feel the chill radiating through it even now. The draft slips under the door again, brushing your ankles. You imagine how the cold would take over the room if the embers behind you suddenly dimmed into absolute black. The floor would stiffen, the air would grow heavy and still. Even your breath might feel too cold to inhale comfortably. You step back toward the hearth and take a long breath. The faint warmth clings to your face for a moment before dissolving. You can almost feel what it must have been like for families to cluster around each other when the fire went out. They would wrap themselves in every layer they owned. They would bury their hands into straw. They would press their feet against warm stones heated earlier in the evening. They would gather children in their arms, whispering soothing words that fogged the cold air between them. You sit on the floor and let your fingers sift through the ash again. Tiny grains cling to your skin, cool and powdery. Beneath them, one ember glows like a sleeping eye. You blow gently on it. The ember brightens for a moment, then fades back to its dim orange hue. You feel an odd sense of connection to all the hands that performed this tiny rescue throughout history. Simple actions often carried the difference between warmth and bitter cold. A quiet rustle draws your attention. One of the children stirs under the blanket, adjusting their position. They are warm enough for now, but you imagine how quickly that could change. Without a flame to breathe life into the air, the house grows colder by the hour. The stones in the floor gradually lose their stored heat. The walls release whatever warmth they absorbed. The animals below shift less often as they begin to sleep deeply, sending fewer pulses of warmth upward. You rise slowly, moving to the centre of the room to study how the cold behaves. It moves like a tide. It begins at the edges, slipping along the walls, curling around the windows, creeping beneath the door. Then it spreads through the floorboards, quiet but determined. Finally it reaches the beds, brushing fingers of cold over blankets and faces. A family without fire feels this approach long before dawn arrives. Yet even in the coldest homes, people found ways to endure. They placed heated stones near their feet. They slept with dogs curled beside them. They wrapped heads and hands in whatever fabric they had. Some families even breathed into their blankets to create pockets of warm air, letting the heat gather under the cloth. You move closer to the hearth once more, letting the embers' faint glow light your fingertips. The truth settles gently into your mind. For those who lived in the poorest cottages, survival meant learning how to live in darkness without fear. They slept beside shadows beneath blankets that smelled of earth and smoke, trusting their own breath, and the bodies around them to supply whatever warmth the night refused to give. You sit in the quiet for another long moment, listening to the tiny crackle of the ember beneath the ash. It flickers like a heartbeat in the dark, and you feel the weight of what it meant to survive without a fire when winter pressed hardest against the world. You let the room settle around you for a moment, the ember's faint glow softening your vision, until everything looks like it floats in a gentle haze. Then you turn your attention to something subtle, but unmistakably important. Before a medieval family lay down for the night, they performed small rituals that shaped the atmosphere of the room. Not formal ceremonies, not grand gestures, but quiet habits carved from experience. You step toward the hearth again, noticing how the family prepared every corner of their small world before sinking into sleep. You glance at the pot of broth cooling by the wall. The mother ladled the last warm spoonfuls into the children earlier, and the remnants now sit under a cloth ready to become tomorrow's breakfast. Evening meals were often thin and modest, but even the slightest warmth lingering in the stomach could help blunt the cold pressing at the door. Simple food carried its own kind of comfort, a calm foundation for long winter hours. Near the door you see the broom made from stiff twigs propped against the frame. Just before lying down, someone swept the floor in a few practiced strokes, pushing debris toward a small pile near the wall. Many households believed that sleeping in an untidy room attracted pests and illness. Whether or not the belief had practical truth, people followed the habit diligently. Cleanliness, even in its simplest form, brought a sense of order to a world that could feel frighteningly unpredictable. On a small stool beside the hearth, a few dried herbs lie bundled in twine. Their scent reaches you as you lean closer. The aroma is soft and slightly sweet, a mixture of plants gathered during the warmer months. Some families placed herbs near sleeping areas to calm the mind or to mask the smell of damp wool and smoke. You imagine a mother gently brushing these herbs across a blanket before laying it over her children, hoping the fragrance would make sleep come more easily. A simple fact slips into your awareness as you examine the bundles. In many communities, people used herbs not for luxury but for their believed medicinal or protective qualities. Texts from rural healers mention winter evening mixtures intended to ease breathing, soothe nerves, or chase away lingering aches from long days of work. You sniff the bundle again. Perhaps this one holds mint or sage plants valued for their calming effects. You step toward a wooden basin sitting near the wall. The basin holds a little water dark and still in the dim light. Before sleep, families often wash their hands and faces lightly, not for cleanliness alone, but to remove the dust and smoke collected throughout the day. The cold water stings as you dip your fingers into it. You imagine villagers performing this simple wash quickly, their breath fogging in the cold air before drying their hands on a rough cloth. Your attention shifts to another object, a short wooden stick with a charred end. You pick it up and realize it is used to rake through the ashes. Many families stirred the hearth before bed, arranging the remaining embers so they would last longer. You gently push it into the ashes, feeling the soft crunch as the tool glides beneath the surface. This small act kept the fire alive just enough to spark again in the morning. A flicker of memory brings you a curious bit of custom. Some households believed that if the last ember died before sunrise, it invited ill fortune. People took great care to cover the ember well, sometimes whispering a short wish or breath of thanks before placing ash over it. Whether this carried mystical meaning or simple caution hardly mattered. It turned a necessary task into a tender moment of connection with the home itself. You rise and wander toward the bedding again. The mother gently adjusted the blankets earlier, making sure they lay smoothly. She placed the children in the centre of the sleeping area nearest the warmth. You picture her doing the same every night, her hands arranging those little details without thought, guided by a lifetime of winter routines. As you watch the quiet room, a question forms in your mind, one that researchers often discuss when studying domestic writings. Did these nightly patterns carry symbolic meaning, or were they purely practical? Some argue that these habits formed an informal ritual structure offering psychological comfort as darkness pressed in. Others believe the routines were simply efficient ways to manage a difficult environment. Standing here now, you sense that both explanations might be true. Ritual often grows from necessity. You let your gaze wander to the door one last time. The father tucked a cloth into the gap at the bottom just before lying down. He pressed it with his foot, checking that no icy draft could slip through. That single action feels like a quiet declaration. The house is ready. The family can rest. You move back toward the hearth and sit cross-legged. The ember glows, faintly pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The sounds of sleep begin to fill the room. A child breathes softly. Someone shifts under a blanket. The animals below stir and settle again. Each sound blends with the rituals performed just moments earlier, and as you sit in the dimness you begin to sense the deeper purpose behind all these small tasks. When the winter night stretches impossibly long and cold, stability becomes warmth. Repetition becomes protection. Familiar gestures hold the darkness at bay. You breathe slowly, letting the soft scent of herbs, the faint glow of embers, and the memory of the evening's quiet movements wrap around you like an invisible blanket. These humble rituals performed day after day turn a harsh world into one where sleep can find you without fear. The house exhales, the room stills, the night deepens, and you settle deeper into the quiet rhythm of survival. You shift your weight toward the centre of the room again, and your eyes fall on the smallest sleepers tucked tightly beneath the blankets. The children lie bundled so closely together that at first glance they look like a single curled shape, a little nest of limbs and wool and quiet breath. You step closer, noticing how instinctively they gravitated toward each other as the night deepened. In a world where heat is precious, children become experts at borrowing every bit available. You crouch beside the pallet and study the way their bodies line up. One lies on their side knees pulled to the chest. Another presses their forehead into the first child's shoulder. A younger one curls their feet underneath the others, tucked so deeply into the layered blankets that only the top of their hair peeks out. You inhale gently. The warmth radiating from their small nest spreads through the air like a soft glow, subtle but unmistakable. A piece of well-documented rural life floats back to you as you watch them. Households often place children at the very centre of the sleeping arrangement because their smaller bodies lost heat faster. Keeping them surrounded on all sides offered insulation that straw and blankets alone could never match. It is a simple choice, but one mentioned repeatedly in old descriptions of large communal beds found in many regions. You lean in a little closer and notice one child clutching a small wool scrap in their hand. The scrap looks like it once came from a much larger cloth, but now it is worn down to a soft twist of threads. Items like this often functioned as comfort objects held through long winter nights when darkness felt too big. You imagine little fingers gripping it while storms howled outside, anchoring themselves to something familiar and warm. Near the children's heads lies a tiny cloth pouch. When you lift it gently, a faint scent of dried flowers drifts upward. Perhaps someone placed bits of summer herbs inside months before. Villagers sometimes believed that placing fragrant herbs near sleeping children helped soothe nightmares or chase away cold season spirits that were said to wander through homes during the deepest nights. Whether or not anyone truly feared such spirits, the pouch adds a small layer of reassurance, a psychological warmth glowing alongside the physical one. One child shifts slightly, letting out a tiny murmur, half dream and half instinct. As they settle again, their foot brushes the wool of another blanket. You notice that the blankets near the children are slightly thicker, with patches that clearly came from better quality cloth. Parents often saved the softest pieces for the younger sleepers, even if the adults themselves had to make do with scratchy layers. A small act of tenderness in a season that demands toughness. You sit beside the bed and rest your palm lightly against a blanket corner. The surface feels alive with warmth, as if the children generate enough heat to push back the cold by sheer determination. You can almost feel the straw shifting softly beneath the layers each time one child breathes deeply, or wiggles into a more comfortable position. Your thoughts drift toward a question researchers often ponder when reading old household accounts. How did families decide who slept where when space was so limited? Some argue that positions were arranged strictly by age and vulnerability. Others think such decisions flowed naturally, changing from night to night depending on who felt unwell, who needed comfort, or who finished chores first. The surviving evidence is quiet on specifics, leaving room for the imagination to fill in the gaps. Watching the scene now, you sense the choices happen without discussion, shaped by instinct and affection, rather than rules. You glance toward the mother who sleeps only a short distance from the children. Her hand rests near the edge of their blankets, close enough to touch them if needed. Even in sleep, her posture leans toward them slightly, as if she senses when one stirs or shifts. You imagine her waking instantly if a child cried out in the dark. In a world without heated rooms or bright lamps, keeping children warm and safe was an unending task, part instinct, part vigilance. A small sound rises from beneath the blankets. One child hiccups softly in their sleep, then curls tighter against their sibling. You imagine how many nights throughout history, echoed with similar tiny noises, the soft whimper of a dream, the rustling of straw, the creak of a wooden board beneath a shifting knee. These sounds belong to a cold world, but also to a tender one. You adjust your position and scan the room. The warmth near the children contrasts sharply with the chill lingering near the walls. You can almost see where the cold sits, pooling in the corners, like a quiet shadow waiting for an opportunity to drift closer. But the children's nest holds it at bay, forming its own protective circle. You stretch your hand toward the nearest sleeping child and stop just before touching the blanket. You can feel the warmth radiating upward. It reminds you of small animals in burrows gathering together to survive the longest nights. You picture medieval illustrations that show families sleeping in close huddles, and realize those images were not symbolic. They simply reflected reality, as you watch little details begin to emerge. One child's hair curls faintly with moisture from warm breath tucked under the blanket. Another's small sock peeks from under the covers, damp around the edges from sweat, a quiet reminder of how the human body fights the cold even while resting. These details make the entire scene feel more intimate, more immediate, as if you can sense the rhythmic rise and fall of their chests. A peculiar bit of rural childhood lore surfaces in your thoughts. In some villages, people believed that if a child slept with a smooth stone warmed earlier by the hearth, the heat would help protect their spirit from wandering too far during dreams. Whether this belief was metaphorical or literal is hard to say, but the idea appears in scattered accounts. You glance near the bedding and notice exactly such a stone tucked inside a cloth pouch. Someone here clearly follows the old ways, blending practicality and gentle superstition. You listen again to the sounds of the room. The quiet breathing of children merges with the occasional groan of timber and the soft murmurs of animals below. It creates a steady pulse, a kind of nighttime rhythm that surrounds anyone who sleeps here. You imagine the children growing up with this soundtrack so familiar that silence would feel strange to them. Your gaze drifts once more over their bundled forms. You notice how close their faces are, how their blankets overlap, how their feet tangle slightly in the middle. Their sleep is not spaced out or orderly. It is tangled and warm and completely practical. In the deepest winter, closeness is comfort. Closeness is survival. You settle back onto your heels and let the warmth wash over you for another moment. The children do not know how vulnerable the night can be. They simply sleep trusting the nest around them, trusting their parents, trusting that the warmth within the blankets will hold until the first pale hint of morning light touches the roof. And as you watch them breathe slow and even, you begin to understand something simple and profound. When the world is at its coldest, the smallest sleepers rely not on fires or heavy walls, but on each other. In this little room, their shared warmth becomes a quiet triumph over the darkness outside. You ease yourself away from the children's sleeping forms and shift toward the opposite end of the room, where the blankets lie layered in a different pattern. Here the bedding is wider, flatter, almost expectant. You notice the space is larger than what the family needs tonight. That extra stretch of straw and cloth carries a quiet story of its own, one woven into the routines of countless medieval households. You lower yourself beside the sleeping area and touch the edge of the pallet. The straw crunches softly beneath your fingers, a sound both familiar and strangely symbolic. There were nights in every village when travellers arrived unexpectedly seeking a place to sleep before the cold claimed them on the open road. Inns were scarce in rural regions, far too costly for most, and so families opened their doors to strangers when necessity demanded it. Warmth was not something you hoarded. It was something you shared even awkwardly. You imagine a knock at the door hours after sunset. A weary traveller steps inside, face red from wind clothes, stiff with frost. They offer greetings in a trembling voice, hoping not to be turned away. In many regions, written accounts describe how hospitality was more obligation than choice. Villagers understood that one unlucky winter journey could leave any of them desperate for shelter someday. Sharing the room meant sharing survival. You run your hand along the blankets laid out here. The fabric feels rougher, scratchier. These are not the cloaks or softer layers reserved for family. They are the communal bedding worn thin but always ready. Some surviving records mention that these extra beddings were patched with whatever scraps a household could spare, used specifically for visitors, hired workers, or the occasional wandering merchant. A faint scent lingers in the cloth. Smoke, leather, sweat. You inhale again and catch a trace of dried horsehair, likely from a saddlebag, brushing against the blanket on some past winter night. Every piece of fabric here holds the memory of strangers who slept in this very room listening to the same timber, creaks and animal murmurs below. A small memory from folklore surfaces as you lift one corner of the blanket. In some rural communities, people believed that sharing a bed with a traveller brought good fortune, because new stories carried warmth of their own. Whether or not anyone fully embraced the idea, it softened the awkwardness of lying elbow to elbow with someone you had never met. The belief gave comfort to nights when personal space dissolved into necessity. You shift your weight, imagining how tightly everyone must have packed together when a guest arrived. Family members might adjust their positions, squeeze closer to the wall, or rearrange themselves so the visitor could slide into the warmest portion of the pallet. It was not luxury, it was practical compassion. As you study the bedding, a question drifts through your thoughts, one that researchers discuss when examining travel customs in medieval rural life. Did visitors always sleep among the family, or did some households set aside separate loft spaces or corner beds? Accounts differ from region to region. Some describe open communal sleeping, while others mention modest dividers made from cloth curtains or wooden screens. The truth seems to depend on resources, climate, and the traditions of each village. You look around this small cottage and sense that privacy is a luxury no one expects. A guest here would share everything. The warmth, the draughts, the night sounds, the soft breathing of children, even the faint sweetness of herbs hanging near the rafters. You imagine lying between strangers' elbows, grazing blankets, overlapping breath, mixing in the cold air. Yet in this world, such closeness becomes oddly comforting. You run your fingers along the frame of the bed. The wood feels slightly dented, as if someone often bumped into it when climbing in or out. You picture late arrivals slipping in quietly, trying not to wake the household, though inevitably someone shifted and muttered half asleep. Perhaps the visitor whispered thanks into the dark. Perhaps the host murmured a soft welcome. These brief exchanges form the warmth of winter hospitality. Your hand drifts across a pillow-like bundle stuffed with straw. It crackles softly under your touch. Pillows in peasant homes were often improvised from whatever materials could be found, and families sometimes offered the flattest one to visitors, while keeping the slightly softer ones for their children. You admire the practicality of this arrangement. The guest receives shelter and a place to rest. The family keeps their children warm and comfortable. Simple, fair, and efficient. You imagine the traveller lying here exhausted from roads coated in ice boots, still damp from trudging through slush or snow. Perhaps they arrived carrying news from other villages. Perhaps they traded a small story in exchange for a warm corner. Storytelling often served as currency when coin was scarce. You picture a voice in the darkness describing far-off markets or distant storms, while the family listened drowsily. You sit back and glance around the room. Even now the extra bedding feels like an invitation, a silent promise that any soul caught in the cold could find a little warmth here. Hospitality was not an accessory to medieval life. It was a shared defence against a season that cared nothing for boundaries or names. Below your feet a goat shifts in its sleep. The vibration travels through the boards and into the pallet beside you. A sleeping visitor might have felt that and smiled faintly grateful to lie above warm bodies instead of beside a frozen road. You drag your hand slowly over the weave of the blanket again. It holds faint traces of many nights like that, each one layered into the fabric. The patches sewn in different colours, the uneven stitches, the stretched corners that bear the marks of hurried hands pulling it into place. These pieces tell the story of countless winter evenings when warmth was shared because it had to be. As you remain still, a quiet truth settles gently onto your shoulders. When the cold was unforgiving, sleeping arrangements became flexible, expanding and contracting like breath. A family might go to sleep expecting a peaceful night, only to find themselves sharing blankets with someone unexpected. And yet, instead of resentment, this closeness often sparked small exchanges of gratitude or humour, bridging lives that would otherwise remain separate. You lower your palm to the straw once more. It feels firm, slightly uneven, but welcoming in its own humble way. You imagine lying here beside a stranger, the night stretching long and cold, and realizing that warmth can come from unexpected companionship. In a world where winter presses hard against the walls, people learn that comfort sometimes arrives in the form of shared space, shared breath, and shared survival. In this little room, where every corner holds a story, even a stranger becomes part of the nightly rhythm woven into the fragile warmth that keeps the darkness outside where it belongs. You rise from the pallet and let your gaze wander toward the shuttered window again. A faint silver glow seeps through the edges, and you sense that dawn is creeping closer. But in a medieval winter, dawn does not arrive with warmth or colour. It arrives with a quiet chill that settles over everything like a second skin. You take a slow step toward the door, and the cold brushes your face with a gentle but unmistakable sharpness. You pause. The room has grown noticeably cooler, even though the family sleeps only a few feet away. The ember under the ash has dimmed to a tiny red dot no brighter than the eye of a resting animal. You crouch beside it and feel barely any heat at all. This is the moment when many households woke each morning, breath-fogging fingers, stiff skin, tingling as if the cold itself were pulling them gently from sleep. You lean closer and notice frost gathering along the edge of the hearth. The thin crystals sparkle faintly delicate patterns formed in the hours when darkness held the world most firmly. You blow softly on one, watching it melt into a tiny bead of water. The sensation reminds you of something noted in old winter records. Many villagers woke with frost on their blankets, especially on the side closest to the wall. Their breath froze lightly during the night and clung to the surface like a silver dusting. You rise slowly and step toward the window. When you place your palm near the shutter, the cold strikes with immediate intensity, as if a fist of icy air waits on the other side. You pull your hand back and exhale softly. The air inside is still biting, but the space nearest the window feels like a doorway to another world entirely. A curious household tale surfaces as you stand there. Some families believed that frost creeping into the house during the early hours was a sign that winter giants walked outside. Their footprints, they said, pressed the cold deeper into the earth. Whether anyone took the idea seriously or simply enjoyed telling it to children, the image rises easily as you look at the shimmering frost. You glance back toward the sleeping family. Their breaths lift the blankets gently, a steady wave rising and falling. As the room cools, their bodies curl tighter. The mother shifts slightly, pulling the covers higher to shield the children from the creeping cold. You can almost hear the rustling of wool and straw adjusting under their weight. A question often discussed by researchers nudges your thoughts. How did families tolerate such freezing mornings without falling ill constantly? Some scholars suggest that daily exposure hardened them against sudden chills. Others argue that sickness was far more common than records indicate, hidden behind sparse documentation. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Standing here now, feeling the cold reach into your sleeves, you understand how resilient people had to be simply to face the morning. You step closer to the door. A thread of cold air slips beneath it, flowing silently across the floor like a thin stream. You crouch and watch as a few strands of straw tremble. The movement almost feels alive, a reminder that winter never sleeps. You trace your fingers along the floor and feel how the cold clings to low places, first gathering there before rising toward the bedding. You straighten and inhale deeply. The air tastes crisp, almost metallic, the way winter mornings always taste before any cooking fire brightens the world. You imagine waking in this chill, pulling yourself from the blankets while your joints creak like the beams overhead. You picture stepping into the same cold that filled the room during the night, only now it feels sharper, because you're no longer wrapped in shared warmth. Your attention drifts to the ceiling beams. A faint haze of frost clings where the wood meets the roof. It looks like a thin string of stars scattered in the dim light. You reach up and touch one beam. The wood feels cold enough to numb your fingertips almost instantly. You pull your hand back and flex your fingers, warming them slightly with your breath. Beneath you, the animals stir more frequently now. A soft grunt rises from the lower level, followed by the shuffling of hooves against hay. The warmth from below feels weaker, as if the animals are still half asleep and have not yet begun their morning movements that warm the boards. Their slow stirring adds a quiet rhythm to the room, a sign that dawn approaches even before the light fully reveals itself. You walk to the sleeping platform again, watching how the blankets rise slowly with every breath. You lean down and lift a small corner of cloth. The space beneath feels warmer than the rest of the room, a tiny sanctuary tucked into the cold. But the chill still nibbles at the edges, creeping inward inch by inch as the hours pass. You picture the family waking soon. Their first breath would form a small cloud. Their first words would fall into cold air. They would shake frost from their blankets, rub their hands together, and move instinctively toward the hearth to coax the ember back to life. Everything begins from that ember. Without it, the day would start much harder. You return to the hearth and stir the ash slightly. A faint glow brightens under your touch. You blow gently until the colour deepens. The ember pulses once, then relaxes again. You imagine doing this every winter morning, the simple task becoming a ritual of hope. If that tiny centre of heat wakes again, so does the family. You settle onto a stool, letting the cold fold around your limbs like a thin cloak. Dawn drifts into the room with a pale, ghostly softness. It holds no warmth, but it carries the promise of movement, the beginning of chores, the spark of daily routine that helps chase away the night's stillness. The cold lingers longer in a medieval dawn than you expect. It stretches into every corner, touches every breath, announces itself before any other sensation. But inside this little cottage, surrounded by the sounds of waking animals and the slow stirring of sleepers, you realise something quietly profound. Morning cold is not the enemy. It is simply the next chapter in a rhythm that repeats every day until spring finally remembers its way home. You sit quietly, watching that pale light creep just a little farther across the floor, and it reminds you of something else entirely. Medieval nights were long, winter nights even longer. And families did not always sleep in one unbroken stretch the way many people do today. Instead, sleep often arrived in two separate waves. You feel the thoughts settle into your mind as naturally as the cold settles into the corners of the room. This divided rest was not strange to them. It was simply the rhythm of the season. You rise slowly from your stool and walk toward the centre of the room again. The family is still deeply asleep, but you sense that if you were living in this world, you might already have woken once by now. The quiet stillness of the night often faded after a few hours, replaced by a soft, drifting wakefulness. People stirred, whispered, prayed, tended the fire, checked on animals, or simply lay awake in the dark, letting their thoughts wander. You imagine yourself lying on a straw pallet, eyes half open, listening to the darkness hum with its strange midwinter pulse. You take another slow step and the floorboard creaks under your weight. The sound seems louder now, sharp against the soft breathing around you. You picture villagers waking at this same sound, only for a moment acknowledging it, before drifting into that gentle space between sleeping and waking. Many written accounts from later centuries describe this first sleep ending a few hours after dusk. The second sleep followed a brief interval of quiet activity. This pattern stretches back further than people often realise. You move toward the window as a thin thread of dawn brightens. The cold grows sharper here, tightening around your skin, as if reminding you that the hours between sleeps were spent carefully, with deliberate awareness of temperature. You press your hand against the shutter and feel the night's grip still lingering there. Yet something in the air hints at change. Not warmth, but possibility. You take a slow breath, imagining the patterns that shaped whole lives. A faint childhood tale drifts into your thoughts. Some parents once told their children that waking in the middle of the night was a gift from protective spirits who nudged the household to check the fire or ensure everyone remained warm. Whether or not anyone truly believed such tales, they helped frame those waking intervals in a comforting light. Waking was normal. Waking was expected. You sit beside the bedding and watch the children again. Their small bodies rise and fall with steady rhythm. If they followed the old pattern, they too might stir in the deep of night, mumble, softly curl closer to one another, and slide back into their second sleep without ever fully noticing. You imagine tiny voices whispering to a parent asking for water or warmth, before drifting back down into dreams shaped by flickering shadows. Your attention shifts toward the hearth. You stand and walk closer, crouching beside the ash. A tiny ember still glows faintly, pulsing with the last of its strength. You coax it lightly with the tip of a stick, imagining how someone centuries ago might have woken from their first sleep and done exactly the same. Checking the embers was a nightly habit, a quiet moment when the room felt like a living creature breathing slow and deep. You blow gently. The ember brightens for a heartbeat, then dims again. You imagine the family doing this regularly, the sound of soft breath filling the dark. These moments, those small-shaped winter nights, as much as the cold itself. The time between sleeps might last anywhere from a few minutes to an hour or more. People prayed, told stories, tended their tools, or simply lay in silence, while the world outside hovered in icy stillness. A question rises in your mind, one that researchers still discuss when examining old journals and letters. Was this segmented sleep a universal pattern, or did it vary widely depending on climate and routine? Some evidence suggests that the practice was common across regions with long winter nights. Others argue that it depended heavily on work schedules and access to warmth. The surviving descriptions do not form a single clear picture. Yet here in this dim cottage, the pattern feels almost inevitable. You stand and stretch your arms slightly, letting the cold tug at your muscles. You picture yourself lying on the straw bed, eyes opening midway through the night, the darkness thick and gentle around you. Perhaps you would listen to the wind outside, wondering how many hours until dawn. Perhaps you would reach for a blanket edge and pull it closer or whisper to someone beside you. Maybe you would simply stare at the faint red glow of the ember and let your mind drift like smoke. You move slowly through the room, now taking in the objects shaped by nightly rhythms. The clay pot near the hearth, waiting to be refilled. The small knife left by the wall, ready for morning chores. The herbs hanging near the rafters, intended for calming breath and steady dreams. These things all exist within the quiet space between sleeps. They are part of the world that wakes briefly, only to slip back into rest. You kneel near the children again and touch the blanket lightly. Their warmth rises through the cloth, a quiet reminder that even during segmented sleep the room's centre remains anchored by shared heat. They do not know consciously the rhythm their bodies follow. Yet the winter itself teaches the pattern long before anyone speaks of it. Darkness lasts so long that the mind naturally cycles in its own pace. You tilt your head and listen. A faint rustle comes from the animals below. Their movements grow more frequent as dawn approaches. You imagine families using the first waking period to check the animals, making sure no creature had tangled itself in a rope or straw. The sound of hooves shifting in the dark became a kind of signal. It told villagers that the night still had hours left, but also that the world remained steady. Another soft noise reaches you. A sleeper exhales with a low murmur rolling slightly on the palate. This movement tugs at your attention, reminding you that the second sleep is often deeper, heavier, more anchored. Once the small tasks or quiet reflections between sleeps ended, people returned to rest with a renewed sense of calm. You walk to the far side of the room and glance upward at the rafters. The frost tracing along the beams glows faintly as the sky outside brightens. You imagine lying here in the second sleep, unaware of how cold the world looks above you, wrapped in the warmth of shared blankets and steady breath. You step back toward the hearth and sit once more. The ember's glow dims again, offering a gentle reminder that the morning fire ritual is not far away now. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine drifting into that second, deeper sleep. You feel the world narrow into the sound of breathing, the softness of straw beneath you, and the lingering scent of herbs around the room. Segmented rest is not strange here. It is natural. It is shaped by the long nights, by the cold, by the rhythm of a life lived inside humble walls. You let this understanding settle into you like a slow exhale. First sleep, a waking pause, second sleep. This is how winter whispers people toward rest. And as you sit quietly in the dimming night, you realize that the cold does not control this rhythm. The people do. Their habits, their breath, their shared warmth shape the night as surely as the frost outside shapes the earth. In this little cottage, night is not one long stretch. It is two gentle waves of rest carrying the family from dusk to dawn through darkness and cold, with a timeless rhythm older than memory. You remain seated by the hearth for a moment, letting the embers' faint glow pulse like a sleepy heartbeat, and then you sense the next part of the night beginning to unfold. If you had been born into this world, the interval between first and second sleep would not be idle time. It would be a quiet window when thought-stirred tasks resurfaced, and small responsibilities tugged gently at your attention. You rise slowly, feeling the floor's coldness settle into your feet, and you begin to understand why this midwinter pause became its own little world inside the long night. You step toward the hearth and stir the ash again. The ember answers with a feeble flicker, barely enough to light the edge of your hand. Families often used this interval to ensure that the hearth survived until morning. The ember's life mattered. Its tiny glow could shorten the chill of dawn and save precious time that would otherwise be spent coaxing a new flame from scratch. In many rural regions, old diaries mention how people tended the fire at least once during this in-between period, adjusting ash and charcoal with small practiced motions. You picture yourself doing the same, kneeling on the cold floor, eyes, half-open breath fogging as you lean close to the embers. There is something strangely intimate about the moment. The room is quiet. Shadows move like thick curtains. The ember glows softly, the only sign of colour in a space wrapped in grey and black. You push a thin piece of kindling into the ash, not to ignite a new flame, but to encourage the old one to survive a little longer. As you stand again, a faint creak sounds above you. The rafters contract softly as the temperature dips. The sound feels like a gentle reminder that the night has not finished its work. You turn toward the sleeping family, noting how the mother shifts slightly in her nest of blankets. Even half asleep, she reaches an arm to check the children beside her, feeling their warmth as if guided by instinct deeper than thought. A small, intriguing memory surfaces as you watch them rest. In some regions, people believe that children's spirits wandered lightly during the time between first and second sleep. To keep those wandering spirits close, parents sometimes whispered a tiny rhyme or prayer when they stirred awake. Whether or not anyone took such beliefs literally, the stories offered a comforting layer to the otherwise stark reality of winter nights. You imagine a parent murmuring softly into the darkness, the words blending with the sound of straw rustling beneath their hand. You walk quietly toward the wall where tools rest in a neat arrangement. A wooden spindle, a bone-handled needle, and a small curved knife sit together. Tasks left from the day linger here, awaiting the next moment of free time. Many households used the interval between sleeps to complete chores that required quiet concentration. Mending clothes, sharpening tools, preparing herbs for morning chores. These tasks did not demand bright light, only patience, and a familiarity with materials shaped over countless nights just like this one. You pick up the spindle. Its surface feels smooth from years of handling. You imagine someone turning loose wool fibres into thread while half awake, letting muscle memory guide the motions. Long winter nights offered more hours of darkness than work alone could fill, and so households found practical ways to make use of them. Your attention drifts to another question that often appears in historical discussions. Did this mid-sleep interval serve mostly practical needs, or did people use it for reflection, prayer, or quiet conversation? Surviving writings suggest a mixture of both. Some households treated the interval as a moment of stillness, a time to whisper hopes, fears, or simple daily thoughts to one another. Others used the time to check the animals or stir boiling pots left near the dying fire. The evidence paints a varied picture shaped by region, poverty, and habit. You set the spindle down and approach the trapdoor leading to the animals. You lift it a few inches and peer into the dim below. The warm air rises into your face gently, almost like a greeting. A cow shifts quietly in her sleep. A goat lets out a soft snort. Their movements remind you that the animals follow their own nightly rhythms, separate from the human one, but woven into it all the same. Some families use the waking interval to check the livestock, especially during the harshest weeks when illness or injury could emerge without warning. You lower the trapdoor again and stand slowly. The room feels even quieter now, as if holding its breath. You walk toward the window and place your hand on the shutter. The cold outside presses through the wood, but it feels steadier, less sharp than before. Perhaps the dawn edges closer. Perhaps your mind begins to settle into the rhythms of this world. You tilt your head and listen. The sounds of the house deepen. A child murmurs something shapeless in their sleep, their voice drifting softly under the blankets. The father snores gently. A faint rustle comes from a pile of straw near the wall, as a mouse scurries through it, searching for a forgotten crumb. None of these sounds disturb the quiet. Instead, they shape it. You turn toward the hearth again. On a small wooden tray lies a bundle of dried plants. You pick it up and inhale its aroma. The scent is soft and calming, the kind of fragrance that lingers in clothing and bedding. Some households used herbs during the interval between sleeps to relieve tightness in the chest or soothe aching joints. A warm drink might be prepared if the ember allowed it, though more often the herbs were tucked beneath blankets to warm slowly with body heat. You set the bundle down and wrap your cloak around yourself. The cold touches your face gently, like a reminder not to drift too deeply into comfort. You sit on the edge of the bed and feel the straw beneath you shift with a soft crunch. If you were truly part of this home, your thoughts might wander now. You might think of chores waiting in the morning, of family members away in other villages, of hunger that presses harder during winter months. Or perhaps you would simply rest your elbows on your knees, letting your breath whisper in the darkness while your mind drifts someplace soft and wordless. You lean back and rest your hand lightly on the blanket nearest you. The warmth underneath feels steady and comforting. Soon enough, the family will drift into their second sleep, wrapped in shared heat once more. You feel the rhythm tugging at you too, as if the room itself invites you to follow its pattern. You take one more slow walk across the floor, letting your fingers brush the wall, the edge of the door, the rough wood of the stool. These objects feel different now. They are part of a world that breathes gently in the dark. You settle beside the hearth once more, resting your hands near the ember. The glow brightens faintly as if answering your presence, and as you sit there letting the quiet hold you, you feel the shift in the air. The interval between sleeps has begun to wane. The family will soon slip back into their deeper rest, the second wave of sleep that carries them toward the pale light of morning. You inhale softly, close your eyes for just a moment, and begin to feel the edges of drowsiness circle around you like a warm cloak. The ember glows. The house hums its gentle winter music. The darkness stretches long and calm, and you find yourself ready to drift with it. You sit with your hands cupped near the fading ember, letting its whisper of warmth settle into your palms, and soon another layer of the winter night begins to reveal itself. As the family drifts back into their second sleep, and the room quiets to an almost dreamlike stillness, your thoughts drift towards something that shaped countless medieval nights' hunger. Not the sharp, frantic kind that comes with sudden deprivation, but the slow, persistent ache that settles into the body during long winters when food grows thin and meals shrink to whatever can be spared. You rise from your seat and step toward the small pot resting near the hearth. The broth inside has cooled, forming a thin film on the surface. You tilt the pot gently and watch the liquid move sluggishly. Evening meals in winter were often simple and small, barely enough to quiet the stomach. Many families ate only a few modest servings each day once supplies began to dwindle. Your fingers trace the rim of the pot, and you imagine this household carefully rationing each ladle of broth, every crumb of bread hoping to make their stores last until the first hint of spring growth. You step back and feel your own stomach respond faintly to the thought. Hunger in the medieval world was rarely an emergency. It was a season, a rhythm, a constant companion through the coldest months. And hunger shaped sleep just as much as the temperature did. You recall reading accounts where villagers described drifting into dreams, coloured by longing for food, the mind conjuring images of fresh bread, warm milk or ripe fruit, simply because the day offered so little nourishment. You kneel near the bedding again, watching the family as they lie huddled in their nest of blankets. Their breathing deepens, settling into the heavier rhythm of second sleep. One child lies with their mouth slightly open, releasing small clouds of warm breath. You imagine the child's dreams weaving together sensations of warmth and food, blending survival needs into nighttime visions. Dreams often became a reflection of what the body lacked most. A faint bit of old countryside lore finds its way into your thoughts as you observe the family. People sometimes believed that during harsh winters, dreams carried warnings about the household's provisions. If someone dreamed of empty baskets or fields without stalks, elders would interpret it as a sign to ration more strictly. On the other hand, dreams of animals or overflowing granaries were taken as reassurance that the household would endure the remaining cold. Whether anyone truly trusted these symbols or simply found comfort in them, the stories show how deeply hunger seeped into the imagination. You rise again and walk to the storage corner near the wall. The wooden chest sits there, its lid slightly ajar. You lift it softly and peer inside. Dried beans, a small sack of barley, a bundle of withered herbs. The supplies look modest, far from abundant. You imagine the family counting each handful with care, always calculating how many nights the food must cover. Hunger teaches discipline. Hunger teaches hope. Hunger teaches fear. All three live within this simple wooden chest. You ease the lid closed and stand again. The cold touches your neck with a steady chill. You run your fingers over your collar and imagine trying to fall asleep each night with your stomach only half full. You picture lying on a straw pallet, listening to your belly grumble while the rest of the room sleeps. You imagine that ache blending into the sounds of timber creaking, and animals shifting below a quiet struggle that never fully leaves your thoughts. A question rises in your mind, one that researchers often consider when studying medieval household records. How often did hunger influence nightly routines and sleep patterns? Some believe that mild starvation was so common during winter months that people simply learned to function despite it. Others argue that families adapted their sleeping habits, going to bed earlier or staying under blankets longer to conserve energy. The truth is not perfectly documented, but every piece of evidence points toward hunger playing a constant, subtle role in winter life. You move closer to the door and listen to the quiet beyond the walls. The wind outside has calmed to a gentle hiss, the world settling into its own deep slumber. You lean your forehead against the wooden frame and exhale softly. Hunger changes the way you perceive the night. It sharpens your senses. It makes you notice every little shift of warmth. It makes dreams feel heavier than they should. You step away from the door and sit again near the hearth. You can almost taste the cold air as you breathe a crisp blend of wood smoke, dry straw, and softened herbs. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself lying in this room, stomach empty, mind drifting through dreamscapes shaped by longing. You might dream of bread rising in an unseen oven. You might dream of fields heavy with grain. You might dream of a table full of food you've never tasted in your waking life. You open your eyes again and look toward the children. They shift slightly small faces, peaceful, though their bodies know the ache of winter hunger more intimately than they can express. You feel a quiet tenderness as you watch them. The parents likely give the children the best portions, leaving themselves with thinner meals. That sacrifice has been repeated in countless winter homes across centuries, shaping family bonds in ways that rarely appear in written records, but echo strongly in lived experience. You rise once more and pace slowly across the floor. The hunger that settles into a medieval household is not dramatic or loud. It is patient. It waits in the corners, in the pantry, in the small pot of broth, in the dreams that wander across sleeping minds. You picture a warm spring morning months from now when the first fresh greens appear. You imagine the joy of tasting something new after so many nights shaped by modest meals. You lower yourself onto the pallet beside the hearth, letting the straw cushion your weight. The ember offers only a faint glow now, but even that small gleam feels comforting. Hunger may shape dreams, but warmth shapes rest. And in this dim cottage, both forces linger together, influencing the minds of the sleepers in ways they will never fully understand. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavy but peaceful. You can almost sense the dreams drifting through the room, shaped by cold, by warmth, by the simple longing for food, and by the deep human instinct to endure. And as you sit there letting these thoughts settle into the dimness, you understand that winter dreams were not just stories of the night. They were reflections of the body's quiet negotiations, hope stitched into sleep. You sit quietly, rubbing a bit of warmth back into your fingertips, and then you feel a shift in the air. It is subtle at first, like a soft vibration beneath the floorboards, but it grows slowly, spreading through the wooden beams and into the very walls of the room. A storm is building outside, not just wind or drifting snow, but one of those deep winter tempests that seems to swallow entire villages in white silence. You rise and move toward the window, sensing that every sleeper in this cottage depends on more than blankets and dreams tonight. They depend on each other. You place your palm gently against the shutter. The wood trembles faintly beneath your touch. Outside, something heavy moves through the darkness. Wind sharp and low pushes against the house with patient force. You breathe in quietly. Even without seeing the storm, you feel how vast it is, and you understand immediately why villagers in many regions sought comfort in larger groups when blizzards swept across open fields. You step back from the shutter as another shudder runs through the wall. The family remains asleep, tucked tightly into their warm nest, but you can almost imagine how life changes in a blinding storm. Neighbours sometimes gathered together under one roof when the snow grew deep enough to bury doors. Families combined their warmth, sharing whatever heat their bodies could create. A larger crowd meant more breath, more movement, more life pushing back against the cold. You walk toward the far corner where an extra stack of straw has been piled. You touch it lightly. The fibres feel brittle, dry, and faintly sweet. This reserve would be dragged toward the centre if the storm became too strong. The floor in the middle of the room might be covered with extra straw, turning the entire space into one communal bed. In some rural stories, families even gathered their animals closer, during disastrous nights letting goats or lambs sleep against the warmth of human limbs. The cottage became less a house and more a shared shelter, against a world temporarily transformed into a frozen void. A tiny memory from regional folklore comes to mind. Some villagers believed that the winter storms were caused by giant beings sweeping across the sky with cloaks made of snow. When the storms grew fierce, people whispered that the giants were searching for lonely houses to claim. The only protection, they said, was to gather together so no soul slept alone. Whether or not the tale held any real belief, it made the presence of extra bodies feel safer on terrible nights. You sit beside the hearth again as the walls groan softly. The ember glows faintly, a stubborn reminder that warmth survives even when the world outside feels merciless. You stir the ash gently. Sparks blink like tiny stars before fading. You imagine the family waking if the storm intensifies, stirring from second sleep to add blankets, rearrange bodies and press closer together until the cold no longer feels like a threat. You turn your gaze toward the rafters. Dust falls in a soft drift as the wind above pushes snow against the roof. The thatch muffles the sound, turning it into a steady hush, almost like distant waves breaking along a frozen shore. You tilt your head and listen. The storm's voice is deep and muffled, a slow push and pull that seems to fill the space between breaths. For a moment you feel the cottage float within a cocoon of sound, suspended in a world made of swirling white. You wander toward the trapdoor and lift it slightly. Warm air rises into your face. The animals below shift more often now, sensing the weather long before humans do. Their movements are tense, rhythmic. You imagine villagers climbing down to check on them during the waking pause between sleep stroking a cow's flank or tightening a rope around a nervous goat. During storms, the animals' heat becomes even more precious, their bodies contributing the warmth that might tip the balance between a comfortable night and a dangerous one. You close the trapdoor softly and stand again. You feel the storm through the floorboards now. Not as cold, but as a vibration, a steady heartbeat of winter pressing against the home. You walk toward the centre of the room, drawn by the shared heat radiating upward from the bedding. Even as they sleep, the family's warmth spreads outward like a gentle tide. A question settles into your mind, one that historians discuss when studying communal sleeping traditions. Did harsh storms significantly increase the number of people sharing a single sleeping space, or did households simply make do with the arrangement they already had? Evidence suggests both happened frequently. In some regions, neighbours crossed snow-choked paths to shelter together for a night. In others, families remained home but reorganised their bedding, clustering so close that no single body lost heat to the air. You place your hand on the pallet and feel the warmth gather beneath your palm. You imagine how it would feel if 5, 6, or even 10 people shared this space during a storm. The straw would flatten, The blankets would grow heavy with breath. The air would taste like wool smoke and shared heat. Uncomfortable perhaps, but life-saving. Outside, the storm intensifies. A low rumble slides across the sky. Snow strikes the roof with a soft pattering that grows louder and steadier. You close your eyes briefly and let the sound wash over you. It is not frightening. It is powerful. It reminds you how small a single cottage truly is in the face of winter's sweeping force. You lean against the wall, feeling the chill push back through the wood. The contrast between the cold outside and the warmth inside creates a layered sensation, as though you stand at the edge of two worlds. And you realise something simple but profound in this era. Survival depends on togetherness. Warmth grows when bodies gather. Fear shrinks when voices murmur in the dark. Storms become smaller when shared. You move toward the bedding again, watching the family breathe in unison. The storm presses harder against the house, but inside the warmth holds firm. The blankets glow with softness. Straw rustles gently. A child sighs in sleep. The air carries a faint scent of herbs and wool. You kneel and rest your hand lightly on the blankets. The warmth beneath your palm feels stronger now, as if the approaching storm draws the family closer even in sleep. You imagine neighbours arriving soon, knocking softly, seeking shelter. You imagine the bedding expanding, the bodies pressing tighter, the room filling with whispers and tired smiles as everyone settles for the long cold night. And as you remain there listening to the storms swirl outside, you understand a truth that shaped countless winters. When the world turned white and soundless, people survived by becoming each other's warmth. In this little cottage, the storm may be vast, but inside the heat of human closeness burns softly, steadily, refusing to yield. You stay crouched near the bedding for a moment longer, letting the storm's deep hum settle into your bones, and then you notice something faint drifting through the air. A soft, earthy aroma, gentle and calming. It pulls your attention toward a small wooden shelf tucked beside the hearth. You rise and walk toward it, drawn by the quiet promise hidden in those little bundles of dried leaves and roots. In a world without steady warmth or full bellies, these simple plants often shaped the way people ease themselves into sleep. You lift one bundle carefully. The leaves crumble slightly beneath your touch, releasing a scent that reminds you of the warm soil and summer sun. People collected these herbs months earlier, gathering them from fields and hedgerows, tying them with twine, and hanging them near the rafters to dry. Even now their faint fragrances offer comfort, like a whisper of warmer days lingering in the coldest season. You hold the bundle near your nose and breathe in slowly. The aroma is mild, grassy and soothing, a blend that might come from mint-like leaves or a cousin of chamomile. Old household notes often describe villagers using simple infusions of herbs to calm nerves or settle the stomach before sleep. These were not potions or elaborate remedies, but everyday comforts passed down through generations. You set the bundle aside and pick up a different mixture. This one smells sharper, like dried stems with a hint of resin. People sometimes burned such herbs in tiny amounts, letting the smoke drift through the room, in hopes that it chased away lingering dampness or eased tightness in the chest after hours of breathing cold air. You imagine the faint curl of smoke rising, mixing with the soft glow of the embers. A small memory from countryside traditions comes to mind while you turn the bundle in your hand. In some regions, dried fennel or lavender-like flowers were tucked inside small cloth pouches and placed beneath a sleeper's pillow. These were believed to help guide peaceful dreams or reduce the weight of nighttime worries. Whether it truly worked, or simply created a comforting scent, you can see how such gestures offered reassurance when winter pressed against every wall. You place the bundle down and look toward a small clay cup resting on the hearth's edge. A bit of dried residue clings to its interior. Someone likely used it earlier in the season to prepare a warm drink before bed-heating water, just enough to steep a few leaves. You picture the family passing the cup between them, each sipping the mild infusion, letting the warmth spread through their chests. You kneel beside the hearth and run your fingers through the ash again. The ember beneath it glows faintly, reminding you that hot water is a luxury tonight. But in many homes, even lukewarm infusions drew strength from their symbolism. The act of preparing herbs gave people a feeling of control, a tiny ritual against the cold. A question drifts into your thoughts, one that scholars sometimes explore when studying herbal traditions. How much of this winter plant knowledge came from necessity, and how much from older beliefs woven into rural folklore? Evidence suggests households learned through both observation and storytelling. Some herbs were chosen because they genuinely soothed discomfort. Others were selected because parents and grandparents trusted them, believing their mere presence guarded sleep. You stand again and study the rest of the shelf. A small wooden mortar sits nearby, its bowl stained greenish from years of crushing leaves. The pestle rests inside, smooth along the handle from countless hands. You imagine a parent grinding herbs during the waking interval between sleeps, listening to the rhythmic scrape as they worked, letting the steady sound blend with the nighttime hush. You run your fingertips along the rim of the mortar. It feels cool and solid, a tool that has helped countless nights ease toward a rest. In this world, practical knowledge often grew alongside old superstitions, forming a tapestry where plants carried both physical and emotional power. You turn toward the sleeping family again. The children lie curled tightly together, breathing softly. You notice a faint herbal scent drifting from their blankets. Perhaps someone rubbed a bit of crushed leaf onto the cloth earlier in the evening, hoping the fragrance would help them sleep more peacefully through the storm. A mother's touch, a father's caution, a simple act woven into the rhythm of surviving winter. You walk slowly toward the door and pause beside the frame. In the dim light you notice another small bundle of herbs tied above the threshold. This one smells faintly bitter. Many families hung certain plants near doorways or windows, believing they discouraged illness or wandering spirits during the cold season. Whether or not such beliefs held practical truth, they brought a sense of protection that soothed anxious hearts during long nights. You take a deep breath and let the blend of scents fill your lungs. Earthy, sweet, resinous, faintly medicinal. The aromas remind you that winter survival was never just about heat and food. It was also about comfort shaped through simple ingredients gathered in gentler seasons. These herbs carried memories of sunlight, warm breezes, and greener landscapes hidden beneath snow. You return to the hearth and settle onto the floor again. The ember glows softly, and the herbs give the air a gentle, steady presence. You imagine drifting into second sleep with these scents in your mind, wrapped in blankets, listening to the storm whisper outside. The little cottage feels less like a fortress now and more like a sanctuary, a place where warmth is shared, where storms are endured together, and where plants harvested long ago still carry enough quiet magic to guide weary bodies into rest. You close your eyes for a moment. The cold remains at the edges of the room, patient and present, but the herbs soften it. The warmth of the sleeping family steadies it. The ember holds it at bay, and in that balance sleep finds its way through the deepest winter night. You rest your palm on the floorboards beside the hearth, letting the faint heat seep into your skin, and then your attention drifts toward another quiet truth of medieval winter nights. Illness was a frequent visitor. Not always dramatic, not always deadly, but ever present in the shadows of cold rooms and long nights. You rise slowly, feeling the weight of that understanding settle into the dim space around you. You glance toward the children. One of them shifts slightly, a soft sniffle escaping from beneath the blankets. It is a familiar sound, the kind that tells you their nose is chilled, their throat dry from breathing cold air. You picture how easily a simple cough could settle into a household like this. The air here is damp, the cold constant. Villagers spent hours inhaling smoke from low-burning fires wrapped in wool that held both warmth and moisture. Illness was woven into the rhythm of winter. You walk toward the far corner where a small basket of dried roots and cloth strips rests. These are not luxury medicines, but the humble tools of a family who must care for themselves. You kneel down and lift a piece of cloth. It smells faintly of vinegar and dried berries. People often soaked cloths in simple infusions to place on the foreheads of those running fevers. You imagine a mother dipping a strip into warm water from the hearth, wringing it out with careful fingers and pressing it gently onto a child's skin in the dim light. You pick up one of the dried roots. It is brittle and twisted, the colour of old earth. Some roots were used to ease sore throats or settle a troubled stomach. Others were chewed slowly during the night to help keep coughs at bay. In many regions, these remedies came from knowledge passed down through generations, kept alive by memory rather than written records. As you turn the root in your hand, a curious detail from rural tradition surfaces. In some communities, families believed that placing a piece of healing root beneath a pillow invited protective forces to guard the sleeper's breath. Whether or not anyone believed the story fully, the gesture offered a sense of comfort when illness lingered in the room. You look toward the bedding and imagine such a root hidden under a corner of cloth or tucked near a child's shoulder. You stand again and step closer to the hearth. The ember glows faintly, a tired orange shimmer beneath the ash. You stir it lightly and think of how many winter nights depended on this fragile warmth. When someone grew sick, the hearth became the centre of care. Warm water, soft cloths, heated stones wrapped in wool. All of it came from the few glowing coals that survived until morning. Without them, illness would cut more deeply into the family's strength. You walk toward the trapdoor and kneel beside it. A wave of warm air rises from below as you lift it slightly. The animals breathe steadily in the darkness, their warmth filling the lower space. Their presence mattered more when someone was ill upstairs. A warmer floor kept fevers from dipping into dangerous chills during the night. You lower the trapdoor again, and feel the warmth settle gently back into the boards under your knees. A question drifts into your mind, one that scholars often discuss when examining medieval health practices. How much of a family's healing knowledge came from observation, and how much from inherited beliefs shaped by older customs? Some researchers argue that households relied mostly on practical remedies, discovered through trial and error. Others point to hints of spiritual or symbolic protections woven into nightly routines. The truth, as always, feels like a blend of both. You step toward the bedding and kneel beside the family. The mother sleeps lightly, her breathing soft and steady. Her hand still rests near the children, ready to sense a feverish flush or a shiver beneath the blankets. In homes like this, caretaking never truly stopped, even in sleep. Parents woke instantly at the slightest sound or movement attuned to the vulnerable bodies resting beside them. A small cough comes from beneath the blankets. You lift your head and listen. The sound is soft, but it carries a familiar edge. You imagine how easily such a cough could worsen in a cold room. You picture the mother waking, reaching for a cloth, or a warm stone, whispering soothing words as she settled the child again. Nights like this carried more tension than the quiet surface revealed. You rise slowly and walk toward the door. The draught slipping beneath it feels sharper now, sliding across the floor like a cold hand. You place your foot against the seam and imagine someone sealing it with cloth or straw to keep the chill from reaching a sick sleeper. The effort feels small, but in this world, small efforts often held great weight. Your gaze drifts to a clay cup near the hearth. Dried residue inside hints at herbs once steeped in it. Families often prepared mild infusions for the ill-hoping. The warmth would soothe their chests or ease tight breathing. You imagine sipping such a drink in the quiet hours between first and second sleep, holding the clay close to your face as steam touched your cheeks. You return to the hearth and sit cross-legged. The ember pulses faintly. Around you, the room settles into the second half of the night. The storm outside softens to a distant sigh. The animals below shift quietly. The air inside holds a mixture of herbal scent, wool fragrance, and the faint sharpness of cooling ash. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine being sick in this world. No doctor nearby, no warm bath, no steady source of heat. Just the simple care of family, the warmth of shared blankets, the slow healing guided by roots, herbs, and patience. You feel a sense of humility wash over you. You open your eyes again, the children breathe evenly. The mother's posture remains protective. The house hums with a fragile calm. Illness may enter often here, but so does care. So does tenderness. So does the quiet determination to endure each night. And as you listen to the steady rhythm of breaths and the faint hum of the storm's retreat, you understand that winter sickness shaped more than bodies. It shaped communities, rituals, sleep, and the tender ways families learned to watch over one another in the coldest, quietest hours of the night. You let the quiet of the room settle around you again, then shift your gaze toward the door. The storm has softened, but another thought creeps into your mind, one shaped by the countless footsteps that once crossed frozen landscapes long after sunset. Not everyone in the medieval world slept through the night inside a warm cottage. Many travelled, many wandered. Many found themselves far from home with only darkness, cold air and hope for company. You rise slowly, imagining what it feels like to face the winter road when the world falls silent. You move closer to the door and rest your hand flat against the wood. It feels cold, but somehow inviting, as though it carries memories of hands that once knocked here, searching for shelter. Travel during winter was always difficult. Roads were muddy, icy, or buried beneath unpredictable drifts. But people still made their way between villages for trade, for work, for religious duties, or simply because survival demanded movement. In many places, travel remained a constant part of daily life, even when the cold pressed hardest. You ease the door open just enough to peer outside. Snow lies thick and unbroken across the ground. The night sky glows faintly with the reflected white, but the cold beyond this threshold feels sharper, almost metallic. You inhale quietly, letting the air sting your throat. You imagine walking through this landscape with only a cloak, thin boots, and a small bundle of belongings. The crunch of each step would echo through an otherwise empty world. You picture a traveller trudging along these roads, someone whose breath filled the air with pale clouds, whose shoulders shook from the cold, whose fingers curled tightly around the straps of a satchel. They might have started their journey before dawn or after dusk, hoping to reach the next village before the cold deepened. Some travellers carried small pouches of herbs or dried berries to chew for warmth. Others relied on wool wraps and layers of rough fabric to shield themselves from the fierce night wind. You step fully outside for a moment, letting the cold latch onto your skin. A soft wind stirs the snow beside your boots, shifting it into tiny spirals. You picture someone walking alone in this thin, ghostly light. Each gust of wind bites at their cheeks. Their feet grow numb with every mile. Their mind begins to drift between wakefulness and exhaustion. In these moments, shelter meant everything. You turn back toward the cottage and imagine the warmth inside becoming a beacon for any wanderer. But not all travellers were fortunate enough to find an open door. Many slept wherever they could. You picture a lone figure pushing through deep snow, looking for anything that might block the wind. A barn, a shed, a rocky outcropping shaped like a shallow cave. Even a haystack could become a crude shelter if someone burrowed deeply enough. A faint memory from rural tradition floats into your thoughts. Some farmhands used to sleep inside empty grain sacks, when outdoors in winter, crawling into them like makeshift cocoons. It was awkward, but it held warmth surprisingly well. You picture someone curling inside such a sack, now breath fogging the rough fabric, trying to ignore the sting of cold toes and stiff joints. You step back inside the cottage and close the door gently. The warmth, though faint, feels like a soft embrace after the harsh air outside. You walk toward the trapdoor and listen to the animals below. Their breathing remains steady. You imagine a weary traveller finding shelter in a barn instead. Sleeping beside animals was far from unusual. Horses, cows, and goats gave off warmth that could keep a wanderer alive through the night. The scent of hay, strong and earthy, might mix with the warmth and soothe aching limbs. You crouch beside the straw bedding again and imagine lying in a barn wrapped in a cloak, stiff with frost, listening to animals shift and breathe. Barn floors were hard, rough, and often damp, but when the alternative was freezing on an open road, even such crude shelter felt miraculous. You picture someone drifting into sleep beside a cow, grateful for the animal's heat radiating through the winter air. A question forms in your mind, one that researchers discuss when examining the lives of labourers, traders, and wanderers. How often did travellers endure nights without proper shelter? Some accounts describe people sleeping beneath hedges, inside hollow trees, or under wagons. Others mention small roadside chapels or abandoned huts offering momentary refuge. The evidence varies widely, suggesting that travellers adapted however the landscape allowed. You rise and walk toward the bedding reserved for guests. The extra blanket lies slightly askew as though waiting for a tired body to spread it across the straw. You run your hand across the cloth and imagine the relief of sinking into its warmth after a long freezing journey. A traveller's gratitude in such moments must have felt overwhelming. Safety, warmth, the murmur of sleeping voices, the gentle scent of wool and herbs, all of it a refuge from the empty roads behind them. You picture a traveller lying awake for a moment, listening to the quiet breathing of a family they have never met. Perhaps they whispered a soft thank you. Perhaps they murmured a prayer of gratitude. Or perhaps exhaustion carried them straight into sleep, their body surrendering the cold at last. You kneel and touch the floor. The boards feel warmer than before, shaped by the heat rising from below. You imagine a traveller discovering this warmth, realising that the animals beneath the cottage helped heat the space, and feeling gratitude not just for the family but for the creatures who unknowingly shared their warmth with strangers. You rise again and face the door once more. The wood stands solid and steady, holding back the cold. You picture countless hands knocking on doors just like this throughout history, seeking shelter after miles of lonely walking. Some were welcomed in, some found barns instead, some found no shelter at all. Winter travel was a test few passed without scars. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine stepping into second sleep after such a journey. The warmth of the blankets, the softness of straw beneath your back, the scent of herbs, the steady breath of humans and animals alike. All of it blending into a feeling of safety you had not known for hours, or days. You inhale deeply, letting that imagined warmth settle into you. In this little cottage, the night remains cold and vast outside, but inside even travellers find a place where their weary bones can rest, their breath can ease, and the darkness loses its edge. You stand quietly near the door, letting the image of the weary traveller fade, then turn toward another kind of winter sleeper altogether. Not a peasant, not a wanderer. Someone whose nights unfolded with far more silence and far less warmth. You move slowly across the room, imagining stone walls instead of a wattle and daub, echoing chambers instead of low ceilings, and a life shaped by prayer, discipline, and cold that settles into the soul rather than just the bones. You're stepping in your mind into a monastic cell. You close your eyes for a moment and picture it. A narrow stone room with a single slit for a window, a wooden bench, a thin straw mattress, a woolen blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed, a small table holding a candle stub. No fire, no hearth, just stillness so complete that even your breath feels loud. You open your eyes again and take a slow breath. The cottage around you fades slightly as the imagined stone walls rise in your thoughts. You walk toward the far side of the room and let your fingertips brush the wooden wall, then imagine it replaced with cold stone. The chill seeps through your skin instantly. Monastic cells were unheated by design. Heat was considered a worldly comfort, something that might distract the spirit from devotion. Many religious communities believed that enduring cold strengthened discipline, sharpened prayer, and reminded the body of its place beneath the heavens. You picture a monk sitting cross-legged on a straw pallet wrapped in a woolen habit, hands tucked inside long sleeves for warmth. The fabric would feel rough, thick and heavy from years of use. The scent of old wool, faint incense and cold air would cling to everything. You imagine the monk's breath forming small clouds in the dim light as he murmurs quiet prayers before lying down for the night. A small recollection drifts into your thoughts as you pace softly. In some monasteries, sleepers rested on hard wooden boards instead of mattresses, believing that physical discomfort kept the mind humble. Other communities allowed straw pallets, but nothing softer. Blankets were scarce, often shared or rotated among the monks. You picture someone pulling a thin blanket over themselves, exhaling sharply, when the fabric fails to hold back the icy air. You walk slowly toward the imagined window and mimic touching the cold stone sill. Dawnlight would creep into a monastic cell just as faintly as it does this cottage, but the cold there would settle, heavier, thicker, sinking into the joints like a quiet weight. You imagine waking before sunrise to the sound of a small bell ringing through the silent cloister. Even on the coldest mornings, monks rose for prayer, washing their faces with icy water, and stepping into long hallways dimly lit by flickering candles. A question wanders into your mind, one that researchers sometimes discuss when studying monastic rules and diaries. Did monks truly embrace this cold willingly, or did they simply accept it because the discipline left them no choice? Some writings describe the chill as a test of devotion, while others hint at moments of private struggle where monks confessed to dreading winter nights. Evidence varies, suggesting that faith and discomfort lived side by side in ways both inspiring and deeply human. You kneel beside the cottage hearth, though in your mind the flames vanish and the stone floor beneath you grows colder. You imagine the monk's nightly routine, a short prayer, a whispered plea for strength, a slow settling onto the pallet, aware that warmth would never fully arrive. You imagine lying on your side, drawing your knees close, pulling the blanket tight, hoping your breath warms even a small pocket of air around your face. Then you picture the quiet, true quiet. The kind that presses into your ears until you hear your own heartbeat echo faintly in your skull. In monasteries, silence was not just a nighttime condition. It was a rule, a discipline, a pathway to contemplation. Nights passed without whispers, without rustling from children or movement from animals. Only the occasional groan of old beams or distant footsteps in the cloister broke the stillness. You walk toward the trapdoor of the cottage and pause. The animals below exhale warm air into the space above, but in a monastic cell there would be no such comfort. No cows shifting in their sleep, no goats snorting softly, only stone that held the cold with stubborn devotion. You imagine how different the night feels without the warmth of other bodies, human or animal. Sleep becomes thinner, lighter, drifting in short intervals rather than deep lingering rest. You turn back toward the bedding in the cottage. Its warmth draws you like a gentle fire. You kneel beside it and imagine the contrast. A monk would sleep alone, wrapped in solitude as firmly as in the rough wool of his habit. Even in communities where monks shared dormitories, the silence between beds felt immense. You picture rows of straw pallets beneath a stone vault, each man lying in his own pocket of cold air, the quiet so deep it could almost be mistaken for still water. A small detail from cloister life surfaces as you lower your hand to the blankets. In some houses, monks shared warmth only on the coldest nights, drawing their pallets closer together despite strict rules. Letters from certain abbeys describe these nights with tender honesty, whispers exchanged in the dark shared prayers for endurance, the rare comfort of being near another human body. It was not common, but it was real. You rise slowly and step back into the centre of the cottage. The air here feels warmer, almost generous compared to the imagined monastic cell. You sense a quiet gratitude building inside you. Even this humble home with its draughts and dim embers feels luxurious compared to the stone rooms where monks surrendered warmth to seek spiritual clarity. You close your eyes and imagine lying down on the cold stone floor wrapped in a thin blanket, breath fogging the air above your face, waiting for sleep to come slowly. Perhaps your stomach grumbles softly. Perhaps your fingers ache. But your mind focuses on prayer, on discipline, on the rhythm of the cloister. You imagine drifting into a fragile sleep, waking before dawn to another day of devotion and cold. You open your eyes again. The cottage greets you with soft, crackling ash, deeper warmth, and the gentle breathing of a family. The contrast between these worlds deepens your understanding. In this little room, sleep is shaped by survival. In a monastery, it is shaped by purpose. And as you stand quietly, feeling the warmth of the cottage wrap around you again, you understand something simple and profound. No matter the walls that surround them, people find ways to rest through winter, through devotion, through closeness, through endurance. Each world has its own form of warmth, its own way of welcoming sleep. You stand in the soft dimness of the cottage and let your thoughts shift once more, drifting away from the chilled stone of monastic cells toward another kind of winter night entirely. A life with more blankets, more fabric, more space. A world where roofs are higher walls, thicker, and meals slightly heavier. Yet even there, cold finds its way in. You step slowly across the room, imagining doors opening into manor halls lit by tallow candles, long corridors lined with tapestries and beds far larger than anything peasants could dream of. You're stepping into an aristocrat's winter chamber. You breathe in and picture it. A large wooden room smelling faintly of beeswax and dried lavender. Thick curtains hang over narrow windows, their heavy folds meant to trap heat. Carpets cover much of the stone floor, muffling footsteps and blocking the worst of the chill. A canopied bed sits against the far wall, layered in furs, woolen blankets and embroidered quilts. It looks luxurious at first glance, almost decadent compared to the straw pallets of this cottage. But as you take a slow breath, you remember that even manor houses struggle to keep warm, especially when icy winds push through cracks in old stone. You imagine stepping closer to that grand bed, hearing your boots soften against thick woven rugs. You pull back the curtain of the bed canopy and run your hand across the fur. It feels soft, warm, animal-scented. Perhaps fox, perhaps sheep, perhaps something rarer. Aristocrats had access to materials peasants never touched. Furs, imported blankets, dyed fabrics enriched with fine threads. But even with all this cold still found the seams of winter nights. You picture the noble sleeper curling beneath all those layers, breath fogging faintly in the chill. A detail from household records rises in your thoughts. Many aristocratic homes placed warming pans under the sheets before bed, filling them with glowing coals carried carefully from the hearth. Servants slid the pans along the bedding to heat the space just enough for comfort. Yet even then the warmth vanished quickly, swallowed by the vastness of the room. You imagine a servant stepping quietly from the chamber after warming the blankets, leaving the noble occupant to settle into a pocket of temporary heat. You picture yourself lying there, surrounded by richness but still shivering just a little as the cold settles into the corners. Nobility could afford thicker walls and more fuel, but winter respected neither wealth nor status. The great rooms remained draughty, the corridors icy, and the high ceilings allowed warmth to drift upward too quickly. You imagine candles fluttering in the cold air, their flames bending in a silent reminder that comfort can slip away even in grand surroundings. You pace softly as you consider another element of aristocratic nights. Servants often slept nearby, sometimes in adjoining chambers, or on temporary bedding placed at the foot of their lord's bed. They were responsible for adding wood to the fire, bringing extra blankets, or responding to late-night needs. Their presence meant that noble sleepers rarely woke completely alone. You picture a servant dozing lightly on a pallet wrapped in modest wool, ready to rise at the faintest call. A thought nudges your mind, one that researchers sometimes explore when comparing domestic life across classes. Did aristocrats truly sleep more comfortably than peasants, or did their vast rooms make warmth even harder to retain? Some argue that noble families suffered more from drafts because their homes were too large to heat effectively. Others suggest that access to finer materials and extra layers made a meaningful difference. Both views hold truth, and the contrast between grandeur and discomfort remains striking. You pause near the imagined window. Heavy curtains block the cold, but you can almost feel the icy presence behind the fabric. You slip your hand along the edge of a curtain and picture frost thickening on the glass. In some manors, servants stuffed wool or straw into window gaps to keep the wind from creeping in. The work was constant. Winter defeated tapestries, rugs, and thick drapes as easily as it slipped through the walls of peasants' cottages. You step back, imagining the quiet within that aristocratic bedchamber. No storm against thin walls, no sound of animals below. Instead, a deep hush broken only by the occasional pop of a large fire burning in a stone hearth. You tilt your head, hearing the crackle of logs that peasant families could only dream of burning so generously. A noble household had access to whole carts of wood, yet even those bright fires struggled to heat enormous chambers for long. You look toward the imaginary bed again, and picture the sleeper adjusting layers, pulling furs closer to the chin. Aristocrats often slept in long linen shirts or soft woolen nightclothes, garments far finer than the coarse layers villagers kept on day and night. You imagine the silky texture against skin warm at first, then gradually cooling as the night stretched on. A bit of folklore gently rises as you pace. In some households, people placed polished stones under the pillows of noble children, believing the smooth surface absorbed excess cold and protected the child from winter chills. Whether this belief came from superstition or from some practical observation, it lingers in fragments of household lore. You imagine lifting such a stone, now cool and weighty in your hand. You kneel beside the imagined hearth of the manor, feeling the echo of warmth from its mental image. Flames would roar far more confidently here than in a peasant home, yet fireplaces, often built more for display than efficiency, let much heat escape upward. You imagine the noble sleeper relying on layers rather than the fire alone, realizing that all the grandeur in the world cannot fully tame winter nights. You stand again and let the scene fade a little, replaced once more by the warm, shadowed cottage around you. The contrast deepens your understanding. Wealth shaped the materials of sleep, the size of beds, the number of blankets, and the presence of servants, but cold shaped everything else. It erased differences in comfort more quickly than many imagine. You take a slow breath, feeling the roughness of the cottage floor beneath your feet. You think of the noble sleeper wrapped in furs turning beneath heavy quilts in a large, draughty chamber. You think of how their breath fogged faintly above their pillow, just as it would here. Different worlds, different materials, but the same winter pressing in. And as you stand in the dim warmth of this cottage, you understand something clear and quiet. Winter humbled everyone, peasant, monk, traveller, or aristocrat. Comfort varied, but cold reached every bed. You remain still for a moment, letting the imagined warmth of noble furs fade into the real humbler warmth of the cottage around you. Then another presence drifts into your thoughts, heavier than cold wind, heavier even than the long winter nights themselves. Hunger. Not the slow, familiar ache of a modest winter, but the deeper kind that arrives when crops fail, herds thin, and the snow falls early, thick and merciless. You turn your head and look at the family sleeping on their straw pallet. Their breathing is soft, steady, peaceful. But you know there were winters when sleep did not come so gently. You walk toward the wooden chest near the wall. You lift the lid slowly, imagining the hollow feeling in a family's stomach when the chest sits nearly empty. In lean years, that emptiness becomes a permanent inhabitant of the house. Whole villages carried the same quiet dread when harvest yields fell short. You look inside. A few dried beans, a handful of barley. These simple foods suddenly feel like treasure. You let the lid fall closed with a soft thud, feeling the weight of what it meant when supplies dwindled long before spring. You step toward the hearth and crouch beside the ember again. It gives off a tiny glow, but no true warmth. During famine winters, families often let the fire die sooner each night to conserve fuel, choosing darkness over hunger. You sift the ash lightly, watching small flecks dance in the dim light. You imagine someone sitting here months into a bad winter stomach tight, wondering if the ember will be enough to cook even the smallest meal in the morning. A faint piece of old village wisdom brushes your thoughts. People sometimes hung an extra wooden spoon on the wall, when famine struck, leaving it untouched as a wish for better days. The unused spoons symbolised the meal they hoped to serve when times grew kinder. You glance at the wall, now half expecting to find such a spoon hanging there. Perhaps the family has one tucked away for harder seasons. You move toward the bedding again. The children sleep warmly tonight, but in desperate winters, families sometimes wrapped children so tightly in blankets that movement was difficult, hoping their smaller bodies would keep the heat they needed to survive hunger's weakening touch. Parents routinely gave their own portions to their children, eating almost nothing for days. You sit beside the pallet and imagine lying here with an empty stomach that growls until the sound blends with the creaks of the house. A quiet question rises in your mind, one that researchers consider often when studying periods of scarcity. How did famine alter nightly routines? Some suggest families went to bed earlier to escape the ache of hunger through sleep. Others propose that hunger kept people awake longer, minds drifting through anxious thoughts. The truth likely depended on the household. You look at the ember again and imagine the room filled not with warm breath, but with soft whimpers of discomfort. You rise and walk toward the door. You press your fingers lightly against the cold wood, picturing a winter so harsh that villagers open their doors not to welcome strangers, but to trade the last scraps of food, bargaining with what little they had. You imagine snow piled high against the threshold, blocking the way out, isolating families who could no longer reach neighbouring farms for help. You turn and walk toward the corner near the storage chest. In some regions, families placed a small bowl of water there during famine winters, watching how thick the ice formed overnight. A harder freeze meant greater fear. If the cold persisted too long, stored food spoiled, water froze solid, and livestock weakened. You kneel and rest your fingers on the floor, imagining that chill spreading through the room. The animals below stir softly. Their warmth reaches you faintly through the boards, but your mind drifts toward darker imagery. In the worst winters, families sometimes had to choose between feeding animals or feeding themselves. You imagine the weight of such decisions. A cow represented milk, future calves, farming strength. A goat gave milk and warmth. Losing one meant losing hope for spring recovery. You rise slowly and walk to the centre of the room again. You picture the family sleeping in a circle, their bodies pressed closer than ever during famine. Not only for warmth, but for comfort. Hunger twists thoughts. It makes dreams vivid and strange. People often dreamed of feasts of warm bread of fruit gleaming in sunlight. In many stories, famine dreams were described as painfully vivid, sometimes leaving sleepers in tears when they woke to reality. You kneel and rest your palm on the blankets. You imagine these blankets covering thin limbs, ribs showing beneath shirts worn too many nights in a row. In difficult years, clothing could become loose in just a few weeks. A belt that once fit snugly might need tightening day after day. You run your fingers along the edge of the blanket and picture hands fumbling with knots, because hunger weakens both muscle and spirit. A small fragment of rural folklore resurfaces. In some villages, people left a crust of bread on the windowsill during famine winters as a symbolic offering, hoping for protection, or a change in fortune. The crust often froze within hours, but the gesture gave families something to hold on to when anxiety grew heavy. You turn toward the window now and imagine the silhouette of such a crust resting on the sill. You walk toward the hearth again and sit. The ember pulses faintly, reminding you that life persists even when weakened. Families in famine winters clung to that single ember, just as they clung to one another. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine being part of this household during such a season. You might wake often, not from cold, but from the dull, persistent ache of an empty stomach. You might lie on your side, curling closer to a loved one, seeking comfort in the midst of quiet fear. You open your eyes slowly. The cottage around you tonight is calm. The family rests peacefully. The snow outside lies quiet. But the memory of famine winters lingers like a thin shadow across the room. It reminds you that survival was not only about keeping warm, it was also about enduring hunger with courage, sharing what little remained and holding tightly to hope when almost nothing else remained. You inhale softly, letting the scene settle around you. The ember glows, the blankets rise and fall, the house holds its fragile warmth. And you understand that even in the harshest winters, people found ways to sleep to dream and to face the coming day. Not through abundance, but through persistence grounded in love and shared strength. You stay seated near the hearth for a long moment, letting the quiet hum of the room soften your thoughts. The family sleeps, the ember glows faintly, and the storm outside has begun to fade. And then a subtle shift touches the air. It is not warmth, not yet, but something softer. Something like a whisper of change. You rise slowly and step toward the shuttered window, feeling the stillness of the night tilt just slightly toward promise. In the hardest weeks of winter, even the smallest hint of seasonal change carries an almost sacred weight. You place your fingertips on the shutter. The wood feels cold, but not as biting as before. A faint tone in the wind catches your attention, less harsh, less sharp. You lean closer and listen. There is a different quality now, a gentler movement in the air. Villagers often sensed these shifts long before spring arrived. Their lives were tuned to nature's smallest gestures. A slightly softer breeze, a different note in the night silence, a snowdrift settling with a whisper instead of a crack. These signs carried hope. You step back and breathe slowly. The scent inside the cottage feels subtly altered too. The smoke from the ember no longer curls as heavily through the room. The cold, though still present, lacks its earlier bite. You imagine families on nights like this exchanging quiet glances, whispering to each other that the worst might soon be behind them. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. A small memory rises from rural traditions. In some regions, people believed that the earth sighed during the final weeks of winter, releasing a soft breath that signaled spring's distant approach. When the sigh arrived, they said frost spirits began losing their strength. True or not, you can feel how such a belief might grow from moments like this, where the air changes so subtly that it feels like the world itself is shifting in its sleep. You move toward the bedding and kneel beside the children. Their breathing remains steady and warm, their bodies curled in peaceful shapes beneath the blankets. You imagine the mother sensing the air in the morning and lifting her head just slightly, noticing that her own breath fogs less intensely. These tiny details would have meant everything to families who lived winter day by day. A softer breeze could spark conversations about preparing tools for early planting or checking stored seeds. Hope does not need much space to grow. You stand again and walk toward the corner where bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters. You touch one lightly, feeling the crisp leaves crumble faintly beneath your fingers. In certain regions, households burned small portions of leftover herbs on nights when the air shifted like this, believing the smoke honoured the end of winter's dominion. The scent rising from the smouldering bundle would fill the house with a reminder of warmer months, even if only for a moment. You step toward the door and crouch to feel the draft slipping beneath it. It still carries cold, but the edge feels duller. The movement has a gentler rhythm. You imagine a father waking early, pressing his hand to the same spot and whispering something hopeful to himself. After months of bracing against the cold, even a hint of softness can feel like a gift. A thought rises in your mind, one that scholars discuss when examining seasonal rituals across medieval communities. Did people consciously track these small shifts, or did instinct guide them more than deliberate observation? Some written fragments describe careful monitoring of frost, wind and sky. Others suggest families relied on intuition shaped through experience. The truth likely lies between the two. In a world without calendars or weather forecasts, nature itself became the clock. You return to the window and lift the shutter just enough to peek outside. The sky glows faintly with the earliest suggestion of dawn, a pale wash spreading behind distant clouds. You exhale slowly. The snow looks smoother its surface, faintly glistening rather than frozen solid. Even the sound of the wind seems calmer, slipping gently across the drifts instead of carving through them. You step outside for a brief moment, letting the cold wrap itself around you. But this cold feels different. It carries a softness beneath its bite, as if winter has lost a fraction of its strength. You notice a small shape near the edge of a roof beam. A bead of water clings to the thatch, trembling as if deciding whether to fall. In deep winter, everything freezes solid. A single droplet suggests change. You reach up and touch it lightly. The water smears across your fingertip, cold but undeniably liquid. You step back inside and close the door quietly. That tiny droplet reverberates in your thoughts. A sign. A whisper. A hint of the world thawing beneath layers of ice. You move toward the hearth again and sit slowly, letting your weight sink into the straw-covered floor. The ember glows weakly, but even it seems a little brighter than before. Perhaps it is just your imagination. Perhaps not. The house breathes around you. The air stirs gently. You sense the unseen wheels of the season beginning to turn, preparing to move forward at last. You look at the sleeping family and imagine what this shift means to them. The hardest nights slowly fading, the promise of longer days, the chance of warmer winds, the faint stirring of soil under the snow. Their dreams tonight might unknowingly reflect this change, filled with images of running water, sprouting fields, or sunlight on bare earth. You close your eyes, letting the moment rest inside you. Hope grows quietly in winter, often unnoticed, often subtle. But when it appears even softly, it plants itself deep in the mind. The night has not ended. The cold still clings to the room, but the air hints at something new, and you feel it as clearly as the warmth beneath your fingertips. The rumour of spring has begun to drift through the frozen world. You stay seated beside the hearth, holding that tiny promise of change in your thoughts, and then you lift your gaze toward the dim ceiling. This is the final stretch of winter, the last long night before the world begins its slow return to warmth. It does not feel dramatic. It does not announce itself with birdsong or sunlight. Instead, it settles quietly over the cottage like a long exhale drawn from the deep chest of the season itself. You rise slowly, feeling the floor's coolness even as the air softens around you. You walk toward the shuttered window once more. The wood is still cold beneath your fingers, but you sense a subtle looseness in the night. The draft slips into the room as it always does, yet its edge feels less sharp, as though winter is beginning to tire. You lean your forehead lightly against the shutter and let your breath warm a small patch of wood. The sound outside has changed too. The wind no longer hums with the tight crystalline tone of deep frost. It moves lazily now, like a creature whose strength is nearly spent. You step back and turn toward the sleeping family. Their breathing remains steady, warm and rhythmic, filling the cottage with a gentle music. You kneel beside them, watching how the blankets rise and fall together, how limbs have shifted into comfortable positions that only come when a body trusts the night. Perhaps they too feel the turning of the season without realizing it. Sometimes the body knows before the mind does. A quiet thought settles over you as you sit there. During the final weeks of winter, people often described a strange stillness that fell over the village at night. Not a frightening silence, but a patient one. A pause before the world expands again. You imagine stepping outside in the early morning and hearing something you have not heard in months, water dripping, snow softening, ice loosening its grip on branches, the faint crack of thawing earth. These sounds would signal to villagers that their long endurance was beginning to pay off. You walk toward the hearth and crouch beside the embers. Only the faintest glow remains shimmering quietly under the ash like a sleepy heartbeat. You stir it gently. A spark brightens, then settles again. The ember seems stubborn, unwilling to vanish. In many winter households, the final nights of the cold season felt strangely heavy and hopeful all at once. People guarded their last bits of fuel, carefully knowing that warmer days would soon make their efforts easier. A small piece of rural tradition slips into your thoughts. Some villagers believed that on the last long night, the spirit of winter passed silently through each home to count who had survived. If it found a warm bed, a glowing ember, or the soft breath of a child sleeping peacefully, it moved on satisfied. Such stories softened the harshness of the season, giving its departure a gentle face. You imagine winter itself pausing at this door, finding the family safe and drifting away without malice. You rise and walk toward the door. The draft beneath it feels changed now, carrying less hunger, less bite. You rest your hand on the frame and imagine the days ahead, when this very door will open to air that smells of wet soil instead of frozen earth. When the family will step outside, not with shoulders hunched against the cold, but with a light in their faces as the world begins to thaw. A question drifts through your mind, one that researchers sometimes discuss when studying seasonal traditions. Did villagers truly mark the last long night consciously, or did they simply feel it in their bones? Journals suggest both. Some households noted the timing, performing quiet acts of gratitude. Others lived the season without tracking such things formally, yet still sensed a natural shift that invited hope. You return to the centre of the room and let your eyes adjust to the dimness. Every corner looks familiar now. The rough walls, the hanging herbs, the straw-stuffed seams, the children's bundled shapes, the faint gleam of a clay pot, the softly trembling shutter. You feel connected to all of it, as though walking through a memory more than a dwelling. You kneel once more beside the bedding, resting your palm lightly on the blanket. The warmth beneath your hand feels deeper now, as if the family's shared heat reflects not just survival, but anticipation. You imagine the mother waking soon, sensing the air and whispering to herself that winter is loosening, that the sun will stay a little longer in the sky today. A muffled sigh rises from the animals below, followed by a gentle shuffle in the hay. Even they seem to feel the change, their movements less tense, their breaths a little lighter. You imagine the father climbing down later in the morning to find the animals less restless, stamping their hooves with more energy, eager for the coming thaw. You sit back quietly, letting all these impressions settle inside you. The room, the people, the night, the season. Everything gathers together in a soft harmony. The final long night is not a moment of triumph, but a moment of relief. A slow, humble recognition that the cold cannot hold on forever. You take a final slow breath. The air feels different on your tongue, cleaner, softer, filled with the faintest promise. And you understand that this night, though quiet, is an ending. Not sharp, not sudden, but gentle. Like snow melting beneath morning light. Soon the world will brighten. Soon the fields will stir. Soon this family will sleep with less fear in their bones. And for now they sleep through the last long night with peace resting softly over them. You settle down beside the hearth once more, letting your body relax into the gentle darkness of the cottage. The ember murmurs faintly beneath the ash, a final reminder that warmth can exist even in the quietest moments. The air has softened, the storm has faded, and the world holds stillness in a way that invites your thoughts to drift slowly, calmly, like snowflakes settling on untouched ground. You breathe in deeply. The scent of old wool, dried herbs, and cooling straw shapes a cocoon around you. Every sound softens now. The tiny creak of a timber feels distant. The slow exhale of a sleeping child becomes a lullaby. Even the faint rustle of animals below dissolves into a soothing hush. Everything grows slower. Everything grows gentler. You picture the cottage from above. A small circle of warmth in a vast, quiet landscape. Thin walls, dim light, a sleeping family gathered together, and you resting at their side, feeling the last stretch of winter ease its hold. Let your shoulders loosen, let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts wander anywhere they wish. The cold outside can wait. The world will thaw soon enough. Tonight nothing demands your attention. Not the wind, not the darkness, not the long months behind you. All that remains is quiet, and warmth, and the soft knowledge that winter nights, no matter how deep, always move toward dawn. Allow that thought to settle gently inside you, a slow comforting glow, like an ember that refuses to fade. Let your eyes grow heavy, let your mind float. You are safe here, wrapped in the calm of a world preparing to wake. Sweet dreams.